Chapter 509. Out of the verdant canyon they came to the real south of the Tang Empire. The fields were crisscrossed, the flowers and trees flourished, and the rivers flowed smoothly towards the south until they finally merged into the famous Great Swamp. Because of the mountains in the north and the verdant canyon, the Tang Empire did not deploy a large number of troops on the southern plains, even though the South Jin Kingdom was powerful and the navy was even more famous. As a result, this similarly rich and populous wilderness was less magnificent than the north, but more elegant and beautiful. The same was true for the houses on both sides of the road. Most of them had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and were faintly discernible between the green trees and water wheels. It did not appear monotonous, but instead had a different kind of quiet beauty. The black horse carriage continued south. The scenery along the way became quieter and quieter. There were more and more rivers and clear ponds and stone bridges. There were fewer farmlands but more quiet manners. They had arrived at Qinghe County. There was a big city in Qinghe County, known as the first city in the south of the Tang Empire. It was called Yangguan. Although this city was not strategically located, it was located in a very important transportation route. Therefore, although the imperial court did not station a large number of troops here, the defense of Yangguan was under the direct control of the Defender General of the state, Su Shi. Today, the governor of Yangguan was surnamed Zhong. The first surname in the city was also Zhong. They basically controlled all the industries in the city, and the Zhong family was just the most inconspicuous among the big families in Qinghe County. These big families in the south of the Tang Empire owned vast tracts of land and countless wealth. What really made these families last for a long time was the importance they attached to education. These families paid the most attention to education and inheritance. With more than 1,000 years of history, no one knew how many famous people had come out. Not to mention the officials of the Tang Empire, the successive empresses from many years ago, and even several great divine priests of West Hill. Today, many of the children of Qinghe County were serving as priests in the West Hill Divine Palace, or were hired as instructors by the Revelation Institute. The officials at all levels in Qinghe County were basically the descendants of the aristocratic families. However, due to the strict laws of the Tang Empire and the secret suppression of the imperial family for hundreds of years, the families in Qinghe County were relatively low-key. Moreover, they held office in their own hometown and always wanted to fight for face with Chang'an City. Therefore, the entire Qinghe County could be said to be politically clean and well-governed. It was very prosperous and lively. Coupled with the unique atmosphere of literati and a slightly comfortable religious atmosphere that could be accepted by the Tangs, it had always been one of the top 3 places to visit in the hearts of the Tangs. There were many shops and tourists in Yangguan City. There were a total of 132 lakes, big and small, so it was also known as the City of 100 Lakes. The most famous one was the Thin Lake in the south of the city. Although the lake was not big, it was close to the government office. More importantly, there were the best brothels and inns in the south by the lake, and the most gorgeous pleasure boats on the lake. The diplomatic corps headed for the Lank Temple rested in Yangguan City for a few days and stayed in a relatively quiet mansion on the east side of the Thin Lake. The mansion belonged to the Song family, one of the 7 families in Qinghe County. When they heard that the diplomatic corps was coming a month ago, the Song family did not hesitate to let them stay. It could be said that they had given the diplomatic corps enough face. There was a post office of the Tang Empire about 4 blocks away from the Thin Lake. A black horse carriage was parked outside the post office. Ning Ke looked at the scenery of the city through the window. He looked at the scholars on the street who bowed to each other and could not help but smile. He thought of his former classmate in the academy, Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan. The Zhong Dajuan that the Zhong family of Yangguan had vigorously cultivated, the Zhong Dajuan that used to be extremely hostile to him, the Zhong Dajuan that he had slapped countless times, the Zhong Dajuan that he had impersonated, the Zhong Dajuan that he had locked up for a long time, the Zhong Dajuan that he had not thought of for a long time. It's all in the past. Ning Ke recalled the days in the academy, and could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. Now that he and Zhong Dajuan were people of 2 different worlds, he naturally had the right to feel this way. Because of the Zhong Dajuan that he hated, he naturally did not have a good impression of the Zhong family that controlled Yangguan. Incidentally, he also did not have a good impression of Yangguan City. Although he could not find any fault with the city from the horse carriage, He somewhat stubbornly believed that compared to Chang, and this city was lacking something. As for what exactly it was lacking, he was too lazy to think about it. At this moment, Sang Sang walked out of the horse carriage. Ning Ke asked, "Have you sent the money?" Sang Sang nodded. Ning Ke said, "Are you sure that you used the imperial court documents?" Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forget to save 5 taels of silver." Ning Ke said with satisfaction, "That's good." Ever since they left the city of Wei, or more precisely, since the old brush pen shop opened and began to earn a lot of money, they would send some money to the city of Wei on time every month. Although the amount was not much, it was still something. According to Ning Ke, it was useless to send money to that shabby place. No matter how much money they sent, it would eventually end up in the gambling house and the wine shop. So there was no need to help those two guys. Ning Ke basically spent all his money on buying, renovating and repairing the house by the Yanming Lake. He even spent the next year's gambling house bonus. However, this trip to the Lank Temple should be counted as a business trip, so he did not hesitate to deceive Professor Huang He of the headmaster of the academy's words and swindled 3,000 taels of silver from the front yard. Then he threatened and lured Su Chongshan to get 1,000 taels of silver. His pocket was as full as yesterday. He and Sang Sang were still used to being thrifty. However, since they were rich, they naturally began to care about enjoyment. Although the carriage left by Master Yen Sei was good, it was a little shocking to live in a carriage in Yangguan City. So he chose the most luxurious inn by the thin lake and asked for the best room. He handed the big black horse to the inn's waiter and told him not to feed it dry food like bean buns. The waiter was shocked and speechless. He thought to himself that Ning Ke was indeed a rich man. His horse was so delicate that it could not even eat bean buns. Ning Ke was not afraid that the big black horse would get a stomachache, but he was afraid that it would get angry because the food was not good enough. One had to know that this fool was already used to eating fresh fruits, sealwort, ginseng, and other nourishing things. How could he be interested in those bean buns? As for grass, he wouldn't even look at it. It was originally a foodie. This year, it was led into the ditch by the old yellow bull. It began to pay attention to food like the headmaster of the academy, and followed the rule that food was the god. If it really went crazy because of food, even Ning Ke might not be able to control it. After a simple wash in the room, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to the front yard of the inn and asked for a private room on the second floor. They leaned against the railing and looked at the thin lake. As expected, they ordered the most expensive dishes. The food in the south was really unique. Greasy food like smoked duck and meat with soy sauce could also be made light. A green sprout on the side of the plate was elegant. Light food like tofu and green vegetables were dyed with thick soy sauce. Together with a few pots of fruit wine, it was really pleasing to the eyes and the mouth. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang were eating happily, they suddenly heard some noises coming from the lake downstairs. Someone was talking about something that happened today, and the tone was quite angry and dissatisfied. Ning Ke listened quietly for a while and asked the manservant to call the innkeeper. He threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper and found out what he wanted to know. Old grandfather Chui is celebrating his 100th birthday. It is such a big event. Even His Majesty wrote a congratulatory message and asked the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to bring it. The West Hill Divine Palace also sent someone, Xian Zhilong, the general of the West. He is a general of the Tang Empire. He did not rest after entering Yangguan, but rushed to the Fuchin River Chang Garden to visit old grandfather. How dare the House of Red Sleeves be so rude? The innkeeper said. It was obvious that he was really unhappy. Ning Ke then knew that the day after tomorrow was the 100th birthday of old grandfather Chui of Qinghe Prefecture. Perhaps the Chui family thought that the House of Red Sleeves seldom came out of Chang. So they invited them to sing and dance at the birthday party. But it seemed that something went wrong. The families in Qinghe Prefecture had been around for thousands of years, even longer than the Tang Empire. They had always been respected by the world. Except for the Zhong family, the other families did not live in Yangguan, but in the manors by the Fuchin River. There were many famous gardens on both sides of the Fuchin River, which silently proved the background and power of these families. It was universally acknowledged that the Chui family in Ruyang was the leader of the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The Chui family originated from Ruyang State. 1,000 years ago, when the Tang Empire was founded, The Chui family disregarded the opposition of other families and firmly supported Chang. They agreed to let Qinghe Prefecture be incorporated into the Tang Empire. Although it was mostly due to the terrible pressure of Emperor Taizu of the Tang Empire, the Chui family's insistence was proved to be extremely wise. The families in Qinghe Prefecture not only survived, but also won the favor of Emperor Taizu and fought for a lot of benefits. The other so-called families that dared to ignore Emperor Taizu all ended up with a tragic ending. In the subsequent history, the Chui family contributed a total of 5 empresses to the Tang Empire. In other words, His Majesty in the palace of Chang, and must also have the blood of the Chui family. In addition, what was even more awe-inspiring was that the Chui family contributed 2 great divine priests to the West Hill Divine Palace. Today's Chui family was still powerful and unattainable. Old great-grandfather Chui, who was about to live for 100 years, had once been the prime minister. Under the deliberate suppression of the royal family and the civil and military officials, an official from the families in Qinghe Prefecture could actually become the first among the civil officials. This was the first time in nearly 300 years. Just from this alone, one could imagine how important the old great-grandfather Chui was. Many years ago, the old great-grandfather Chui retired from the position of prime minister. Later, his second son was an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Now he had resigned and spent his days leisurely in the manor of Fuqian River. The one who remained in the imperial court of Chang, and was the eldest grandson of the 3rd generation of the Chui family. He had also become the junior minister of the Supreme Court. Such a person naturally deserved the emperor's personal congratulation, and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights to come in person for his 100th birthday. Even many officials in the imperial court guessed that if it was not for the implementation of the national policy, perhaps the emperor would have rewarded him more heavily. Now the House of Red Sleeves might have angered such a super family. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:10. The legendary families of Qinghe County were extremely wealthy and powerful. They had stood for thousands of years in the long river of history. However, they were literate and did not have the face of a nouveau riche or the stench of money. They were truly respectable. If Ningke had heard about these powerful families a few years ago, he would have been extremely excited or yearning for the wealth and power of the families in Qinghe County. However, he did not even bother to raise his eyebrows when he heard about these because he really could not get excited. Although he had not entered the realm where wealth was nothing to him, the word wealth was really no different from the floating clouds between the cliffs in the back of the mountain. The back of the mountain of the academy was an unknown place. Although it was said that the 2 worlds were connected and he wanted to represent the academy to enter the human realm, in fact, he was getting further and further away from the secular world. No matter how great a family was, it was still great in the mortal world. How could it be qualified for people outside the mortal world to look down on it? It was just that he did not know when this person outside the mortal world would become a sublime person outside the mortal world. He did not need to care about the families in Qinghe County, but he had to care about the House of Red Sleeves. He looked at the golden thin lake outside the fence and fell into deep thought. The House of Red Sleeves had a strong background and Mistress Jian was on good terms with the Empress. However, it was just a song and dance troupe and also a brothel business. Although the Tang Empire was open and people did not feel that it was lowly, it was not very glorious either. Then why did those girls dare to fight with the families in Qinghe County? More importantly, the House of Red Sleeves had no reason to offend these powerful families in the south. According to the itinerary, even if they danced and danced at Old Master Chui's birthday banquet, they would not have a problem in time. This does not make sense. Ningke said. The House of Red Sleeves is just a song and dance troupe. Where did they get the courage? You are right, sir. The shopkeeper sighed and said, although Yangguan is not as good as Chang, and in Qinghe County is just a part of the Tang Empire, we are not an ordinary countryside. Old Master Chui's birthday banquet is not a place that anyone can go to. They dared to make excuses when I asked them to dance. The ignorance and disrespect of these girls is really unbearable. Ningke smiled and waved his hand to signal the shopkeeper to leave. After a while, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Thin Lake outside the fence and said expressionlessly, "So they are deliberately making things difficult." The Nikhang song was a dance performed by the House of Red Sleeves during the enthronement ceremony of the new monarch of South Jin Kingdom, more than 30 years ago. It was said that when the Nikhang song danced, no audience dared to blink, and no musicians dared to look at the dancers. When the dance reached its climax, it could even be seen that flowers were falling from the sky. No matter how exaggerated the rumor was, Ning Ke did not believe it. He had seen many dances in the House of Red Sleeves, but he had never seen Nikhang. It was not that the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were keeping secrets from him, but that the dance required 36 dancers to dance at the same time, and the building did not have such a large space. Over the years, the House of Red Sleeves had not performed the Nikhang song in other places except for a few times in Chang'an. No one knew that the House of Red Sleeves could no longer perform the Nikhang song. The Nikhang song had high requirements for the leading goddess. Lu Shui, the only one who was able to lead the dance in the past 5 years, had married into a good family. The new girl trained by Mistress Jian was not as good as Lu Shui. She could dance 90% of the charm of the Huchuan dance, but she could not master the Nikhang song. The House of Red Sleeves was still the House of Red Sleeves, even though they could not dance the Nikhang song. They were invited to the Lang Temple this time to perform a dance called the Heavenly Maiden Scattering Flowers. It was said to be equally beautiful. However, it was still a terrible thing that their most famous dance might be lost, so it became a secret. The House of Red Sleeves had a close relationship with the Academy, and even more so with Ning Quebec. If he wanted to, he could even know each girl's menstrual cycle. For him, the House of Red Sleeves could not have any secrets. He knew that the House of Red Sleeves could not perform the Nikhang song, so he was sure that the aristocratic families in Qinghe County insisted that the House of Red Sleeves perform the Nikhang song because they knew about it. But why would the aristocratic families in Qinghe County make things so difficult for the House of Red Sleeves? Ning Ke could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. He hurriedly finished his meal and left the inn with Sang Sang. They returned to the post office and looked at the black signboard of the post office. He found the mark he needed and followed the mark on the street of Yangguan to an inconspicuous grocery store. In the grocery store, the shopkeeper bowed slightly and said politely, "What can I do for you, sir?" Ning Ke said directly, "This is the secret guard's place, right?" Hearing this, the shopkeeper's expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously wanted to take out a knife from his waist and stab the young man in front of him to death. But he felt that something was wrong, so he tentatively said, "Gale? Rainstorm? I don't remember." "Who has the patience to remember so many of your secret codes?" Ning Ke said as he took out an waist token from his belt and threw it to the shopkeeper. Before the battle with Xiaohou, he had returned the waist tokens of the secret guard and the visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration to His Majesty in the palace. His intention was naturally simple. He just didn't want His Majesty to be in a dilemma. However, to his surprise, His Majesty returned the 2 waist tokens a few days after he killed Xiaohou, and the waist token of the secret guard directly became the head of the secret guard. Of course, this was an honorary title. The shopkeeper took the waist tag and confirmed that it was one of his people. He couldn't help but feel angry. He thought to himself, which colleague trained this newbie? Why is he acting like an idiot? Barging into the shop and asking if it's a secret guard spot? If everyone does this, then what's the point of the secret guard? Luckily I'm careful. Wait, this waist token was a little strange. The shopkeeper looked at the obviously different patterns on the waist token and hurriedly flipped through the words on the back. His expression suddenly became strange, and he hurriedly welcomed Ning Ke into the backyard. After entering the backyard, he hurriedly knelt in front of Ning Ke, raised the waist token with both hands, and said in a trembling voice, "Your humble servant pays his respects to the head of the Imperial Center. I have been secretly displeased before, and I hope your excellency can forgive me." There had never been a rule of kneeling in the Tang officialdom, unless it was a very formal ceremony. When ministers entered the palace and met His Majesty, they just casually cupped their hands as a greeting. However, the secret guard was different after all, and the most important thing was that this secret guard was too frightened by the identity represented by the waist token. The current head of the bodyguard was Su Chongshan, a genuine official close to the emperor. Although the shopkeeper was very sure that Ningke was not Su Chongshan, he knew that the waist token could not be faked. It meant that Ningke was the superior of his superior's superior. Get up. Ningke looked at the shopkeeper with a slightly strange expression. He thought that since he was secretly displeased, why did he say it out? Could it be that all the secret guards of His Majesty were gentlemen who would not bully the secret room? Then how could he secretly? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He said, I came to ask about the matter between the Chui family and the House of Red Sleeves. The shopkeeper stood up with a respectful expression. He did not answer, but asked in accordance with the rules, May I know Your Excellency's name? Ning Quebec. Hearing this name, the shopkeeper suddenly had the urge to kneel again. He used a lot of strength to stand up straight and said in a trembling voice, The fourth steward of the Chui family visited the House of Red Sleeves in the morning and left in anger. It was a very simple answer without any speculation, but it explained a lot of problems. Ningke nodded with appreciation and continued, I don't understand why the Chui family would make things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. This is not in line with the image created by the families in Qinghe Prefecture, and it is also not in line with their style of doing things. If the House of Red Sleeves is just a singing and dancing troupe without any background, this kind of bullying is meaningless and will only damage their reputation. If they know the background of the House of Red Sleeves, why would they dare to do this? Not to mention the former Prime Minister and the centenarian grandfather, they are all *T in front of His Majesty. The shopkeeper said, The Chui family must know that the background of the House of Red Sleeves is the Empress, but the Qinghe Prefecture has been helping His Highness these years. In my opinion, are they trying to suppress the power of the Empress? Ningke was slightly stunned and said, They are indeed not ordinary aristocratic families. They actually dare to interfere in this kind of thing and even dare to choose a side in advance. Then he looked at the shopkeeper and said with a smile, You are really brave to speak frankly about the matters in the palace. The shopkeeper understood the appreciation in Ningke's eyes and finally felt relieved. He said respectfully, Since Mr. 13 is asking, I naturally dare not hide anything. Ningke was slightly surprised and asked, You know me? The shopkeeper said seriously, Who hasn't heard of your name nowadays? You don't have to try to please me. I am just an honorary supervisor, and I don't usually manage things. Ningke said, I just don't understand why the Chui family would dare to do this. Don't they know the relationship between the House of Red Sleeves and me? The shopkeeper said, Previously you asked why the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture dared to provoke the Empress by making things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. I am afraid that a large part of the reason is that they guessed that you are in the city. Ningke asked confusedly, How does it have anything to do with me? The shopkeeper looked as if he had seen a god. Sir, General Xiahou died in your hands. Ningke said, So what? The shopkeeper repeated helplessly, Because General Xiahou, the Empress' greatest helper, was killed by you. You represent the Academy and support Her Highness, so Qinghe Prefecture naturally wants to express their position. Upon hearing this, Ningke thought for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, The headmaster said that I am writing my own story. I don't like this kind of boring plot, so I have to solve it as soon as possible. The most important question is, when did the families in Qinghe Prefecture start to do such boring things? He asked the shopkeeper to bring a brush, ink, paper and inkstone and wrote a simple letter. Send this letter to Old Master Chui. I really want to know whether these aristocratic families want to use the Academy's power to help Li Yu, or to do something else with Li Yu's power. If they really have other ideas, I can't guarantee what I will think of them. Have a good weekend, everyone. I am going to fly again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 511. Thought was a word that had a wide range of uses. It was often used to describe the feelings between men and women. When Ningke left the city of Wei for Chang'an, he traveled with Li Yu, who was disguised as a maidservant. They had gone through hardships together at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road and told stories by the bonfire. No one could tell if he had any feelings at that time. But even if he had, It had been broken in the morning when Liu slowly left his shoulder and stood up. He had no feelings for Liu, but he still had some feelings for her. In the past few years in Chang'an, the relationship between Ningke and Liu had not been broken. Since he knew that Qinghe Prefecture was helping Liu, he had no reason to suppress her. He just wrote a letter to the manor of the Chui family by the Fuqian River and returned to the inn with Sang Sang. They enjoyed the scenery and drank wine, as if they did not know what was happening in Yangguan City. A simple letter was just a test, and it hid some of Ningke's impure thoughts. He wanted to know if the families of Qinghe Prefecture made things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves simply to please Liu and the academy. They wanted to show their loyalty by disrespecting the empress, or if they had other intentions, just as he had said to the shopkeeper, it would be fine if it was the former. However, if the families in Qinghe County really had complicated ideas, then when Ningke could not understand them, he would inevitably have bad ideas. He represented the academy and entered the human realm. His ideas were very important to the Tang Empire today. In the Song family's house by the thin lake, autumn was coming, and the greenery was still there. It was a beautiful season, but the atmosphere in the courtyard was a bit depressing. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves were either leaning against the railings or sitting quietly behind the tables. Their beautiful faces were filled with uneasiness and worry. They were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery at all. Not all the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were brothels, but whether it was dancing, singing, or something else, they all lived a life of greeting and seeing people off. They were all very knowledgeable. They were very clear that although they were favored by the officials in Chang'an, it was because of Mistress Jian's relationship with the palace. In Qinghe Prefecture, even the officials of the imperial court were born to be 3 levels lower than them, not to mention weak girls like them. They were in big trouble when they met the aristocratic families that did not fear the empress. They all knew what the problem was, but they could not find a solution. Although the House of Red Sleeves was going to the Lang Temple under the imperial court's order, they were not an official mission after all. They could not expect the aristocratic families to fear them. As the Western General Xian Jilong was in the Chui's garden, how could they count on him? Thinking of the frosty face of the steward of the Chui family when he left in the morning, the girls became even more frightened. A few of them looked at the little girl sitting at the head of the table, and could not help showing a look of resentment. They thought that if she had not been so arrogant and fierce to the steward of the Chui family, she would not have offended the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture to this extent. Although she was usually spoiled by Mistress Jian, this was not Chang'an. How could she be so arrogant? The little girl was Mistress Jian's personal handmaiden Xiao Chao. This time, she was the leader of the House of Red Sleeves' trip to the Lang Temple. It was obvious that Mistress Jian had begun to train a successor. Compared to 3 years ago, Xiao Chao was slightly older but still young. However, in this gloomy atmosphere, there was no uneasiness in the little girl's clear eyes. Instead, she looked extraordinarily cold. Looking at the girls, she frowned slightly and said, "Nothing has happened yet. What are you doing?" In the world of brothels, Mistress Jian's status was equivalent to that of an emperor, and Xiao Chao was her designated successor. Although these girls couldn't help but silently criticize or make faces, no one dared to point out her wrongdoings. A gentle girl looked at the faces of her companions and reluctantly smiled. She stepped forward and softly advised, "Even if Lady Chui is deliberately making things difficult, your attitude this morning is a bit too tough." Xiao Chao sneered and said, "The House of Red Sleeves only performs for His Majesty and the concubine. No matter how much the old master of the Chui family talks, he can't win against these two. For the sake of respecting the elderly, it's okay to go to the Chui garden." However, they deliberately made things difficult. The steward even dared to threaten them. Do they really think that the House of Red Sleeves is an ordinary brothel? Hearing this, the girls looked at each other. They thought that Xiao Chao really had some of Mistress Jian's aura now. However, facing the families of Qinghe Prefecture, the House of Red Sleeves was no different from an ordinary brothel. Now that she showed such an aura, wouldn't it be more humiliating when others bullied her? Xiao Chao knew what they were thinking, but she did not bother to explain. She took out a bag of fragrant melon seeds from her sleeve and started eating them. She knew that even if the great general of the West did not speak, someone else would. Of course, the little girl was not as calm as she looked because she was not sure whether that person was in Yangwon or not. The wind came from the thin lake and slowly blew through the courtyard. It was quiet, and only the sound of eating melon seeds could be heard. Suddenly, a servant came to report that the Chui family had sent someone again. Hearing this news, the girls who could barely sit still stood up in surprise. They thought that how could they come so fast? It seemed that the Chui family was really angry. What should they do? Xiao Chao was slightly stunned and slowly put the melon seeds back into the bag. The fourth steward of the Chui family came to the thin lake again. It should be the third time that he came here in one day and one night. There were few things that could make the fourth steward of the Chui family come to Yangwon City 3 times in a row. Those who could enjoy this kind of treatment must have an extremely powerful background. Then there would be a lot of trouble. However, the House of Red Sleeves was destined to not encounter any trouble today. Because the fourth steward of the Chui family was carried into the Song Garden on a stretcher. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves looked at the middle-aged man on the stretcher who was dying. Looking at the blood stains that the man's clothes could not hide, they could not help but cover their mouths in shock. They could not associate this man with the calm and gentle master steward of the Chui family last night and this morning. Xiao Chao was also a little surprised. She stood up and looked at the white-haired old man beside the stretcher. The old man bowed to Xiao Chao and said, "I am the head steward of the Chui family. I heard that a servant of the family was disrespectful to you, so I tied him up and brought him here to apologize to you. This servant pointed his finger at you, so the head of the family broke 5 of his fingers and gave him 12 strokes of the cane. Are you satisfied?" At this time, Xiao Chao naturally understood that the person was really in Yangwon City. The nervousness that she tried to hide previously disappeared in an instant. Looking at the fourth steward on the stretcher who was covered in blood, she struggled not to clench her fists but let them hang naturally by the side of her skirt. After getting no dissatisfaction from the House of Red Sleeves, the head steward of the Chui family apologized respectfully again and left the Song Garden with his people. Except for a few drops of blood on the bluestone ground, it was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the horrible shadow cast by that family in the morning last night was just an illusion. It took a long time for the girls to wake up from the shock. When they looked at Xiao Chao again, the way they looked at her was obviously different. The calmness and indifference in Xiao Cao's childish eyes made her look unfathomable in their eyes. Moreover, she had a real imposing manner. Xiao Chao suddenly smiled and then lowered her head to continue eating melon seeds. The girls waved their hands to drive the maidservants away. They personally served the tea and stood aside with a smile. After a long time, Xiao Chao dusted off the crumbs in her hands and took the tea to moisten her throat. She looked at them and said, "In the past, no one dared to provoke us in Chang'an City. Now that we are out of Chang'an City, you don't need to panic. As I said, the House of Red Sleeves is not an ordinary dance club." The fourth steward of the Chui family was beaten half to death. He was carried out of the Song Garden and then carried around Yangwon City on a stretcher, which caused many shocked discussions and speculations. The people in Yangwon City could naturally see that this was done deliberately by the Chui family. They were shocked and speechless. They wondered what kind of background the House of Red Sleeves in the Song Garden had to do this to the Chui family. After all, it was not an ordinary noble family, but the Chui family from Qinghe Prefecture who had the confidence to look down on the Empress's family. Then, something even more shocking happened in Yangwon City. A wood-colored carriage came from outside the city. The wheels were still stained with the red river mud of the Fujian River. The carriage looked shabby and lonely, but everywhere it passed, the bustling Yangwon City suddenly became extremely quiet. Many government runners and stewards stood on the street to maintain order. Many shopkeepers along the street even knelt down in front of the carriage. Everyone in Yangwon City knew that there were only 2 people in Qinghe Prefecture who were qualified to sit in this carriage. One was the clan leader of the Chui family, and the other was the old master of the Chui family. The street in front of the Best Inn in Thin Lake had been closed in advance. There was no one on the street, and it was extremely quiet. The carriage slowly drove to the front of the inn. The innkeeper of the inn had already been waiting by the street. He knelt beside the carriage and respectfully kowtowed a few times. Then, he carefully helped the ordinary rich man out of the carriage. The innkeeper was the innkeeper of the inn, but he was not qualified to enter his own inn today. Following the clan leader of the Chui family into the inn, there was only an ordinary-looking, stooped old steward. The Chui family was the leader of all the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The clan leader of the Chui family was the first person in Qinghe Prefecture. In the hearts of many Tang people, the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was actually the second person in the Tang Empire. Except for His Majesty who lived in Chong and City, no other man could surpass him in status. It seemed that anyone should come out of their room to welcome such a bigwig who came to visit in person. However, Ning Ke did not do so. He did not even show any smile on his face, because he was sure that the person who could become the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was at least as smart as him. Since they were both smart people, why did they have to do so many hypocritical and meaningless things? The Chui clan's patriarch had an extremely ordinary appearance, and he was even more ordinary than the old manager that followed behind him. He wore silk clothes that couldn't be said to be vulgar, yet absolutely couldn't be said to be elegant, and he looked like an ordinary wealthy man. However, his words were not ordinary. I was wrong. The clan leader of the Chui family sighed with emotion. Back then, I wanted to make His Majesty happy in the imperial court. However, I made His Majesty unhappy, so I was driven back to Qinghe Prefecture. Now that I know that you pass by Yangguan, I probably want to prove that I can flatter you in addition to learning and governing the state. Therefore, I wanted to try to make you happy and restore some of my reputation in this field. However, I did not expect that I would still fail. Seems that I was really wrong. I don't have the talent in this field. Looking up at the sky, I have been writing from noon till now, but I have finally broken through the most difficult hurdle. Tomorrow will be much smoother. The newly bought chair is still very difficult to sit on. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 512. Chui Shi used to be the Renhuang of the Central Secretariat and worked in the palace. He was also an assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Personnel. A few years after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was impeached for something and returned to the Fujian River to work as a fisherman. From this simple introduction, this man who looked like an ordinary rich man was just a retired senior official of the imperial court. He was not worth much attention. However, Ning Ke knew very well that when Chui Shi was in the palace, it was when Li Yu was learning to read. In other words, this man was the Princess Qiming teacher. Of course, more importantly, he was the clan leader of the Chui family, so he was a bigwig who must be taken seriously. Although he did not stand up to greet him, he deliberately pretended to be polite. That was why he did not understand what Chui Shi had said. He could not understand why such an important person would want to please him and try to make him happy. Once there was a problem, he would even pay a visit. The history of the Qinghe County was longer than that of the academy. Even if he had to show respect to the academy, there was no reason for him to choose such a crude and direct method. Chui Shi did not solve his doubts. In the following conversation, he calmly and naturally changed the topic, perfectly displaying the temperament and grace of a millennium family. He did not talk about anything related to the House of Red Sleeves, but only recalled the past in Chang'an. Occasionally, he would ask about Princess Li Yu and the little prince. Chui Shi did not probe further and asked Ning Ke to greet the headmaster of the academy on his behalf. He took out a thin letter from his sleeve and put it on the table. He looked at Sang Sang warmly and then left the inn with the old steward who was hunched over. Looking at the quiet street outside the window, Ning Ke said, "He did not need to flatter me, but he did. He did it so casually and casually, without hiding his pride." Sang Sang did not understand. She thought that such a bigwig had already shown enough humility by coming to visit. How could he be proud? In the eyes of the world, the first person in Qinghe County does not need to greet me, a disciple of the academy. But he is a smart man and knows what the academy means to the Tang Empire. Since he knows this, and you are the great divine priest of West Hill, how could it be so easy for him to come? Ning Ke retracted his gaze and looked at the untouched cup of tea in his hand. He said, "There's something strange about this. I feel that Chui Shi just came here to see us. The question is, what does he want to see us for?" and I feel that there's a strong confidence in his calmness. Sang Sang said, even in the city of Wei, I have heard of the families of Qinghe County. Naturally, such bigwigs speak and act with confidence. Ning Ke shook his head and said, there is no such thing as true poetry in the world. To be able to be passed down for thousands of years, it is all about power. The aristocratic families of Qinghe County know this better than anyone else. These aristocratic families have had great divine priests of West Hill before, but not in the past decades. I also know that there are 3 grand cultivators of knowing destiny state in Qinghe County, but one of them died in Chang'an. Then these aristocratic families should know that no matter how powerful Qinghe County is, even comparable to Great River, Yueluan, Song and Wei, they have no confidence in front of the imperial court and the academy. Sang Sang suddenly said, well, there is something wrong with the old steward. She said there was something wrong this time, but it did not mean that the old steward was a bad person. Ning Ke clearly knew what she was thinking. He could not help but be slightly startled, and then slowly raised his eyebrows. The old steward with a hunched back was too ordinary, so ordinary that he did not even notice what he looked like. But Sang Sang said that there was something wrong with him. Now that Ning Ke had already reached the peak of the see-through state, he could clearly see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. But an old steward that he could not see anything wrong with could only mean that he was a grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state. So it is someone else who wants to see me, Ning Ke said in shock. Now there were only 2 grand cultivators of the knowing destiny state left in Qinghe County, and one of them actually came to see him personally. Why was Qinghe County so wary of him, the successor of the academy? If it were not for Song Song's unimaginable intuition and sensitivity, he might not even know that he had been carefully observed by a grand cultivator until a long time later. If the old steward had suddenly attacked him, Ning Ke believed that he would be a dead man now. Although he knew that this would not happen, he still had a strong sense of vigilance. He did not understand the confidence of Qinghe County before, and now he could not understand the intention of Qinghe County. However, his vigilance grew deeper and deeper, even to the point of becoming a weak willow by a thin lake, binding his body and making it difficult for him to breathe. So he wrote 2 letters, one to the academy and one to the nation master Li Qingshan, describing what he had seen and heard along the way, his view of the verdant canyon, and the story of what he had met in Qinghe County. The lonely and shabby horse carriage, under the respectful and even fanatical gaze of the people of Yangguan City, drove out of Yangguan City. Even though the old steward sat on the shaft of the carriage, his body was still hunched and his eyes drooped, as if he could not feel the gazes from both sides of the street, as if he had fallen asleep. After an unknown amount of time, the carriage drove into a quiet and secluded manor on the Fuqian River, directly driving to the deepest part of the manor. There was a small building in the garden, and the garden walls that were piled up with rocks were not very high, but there was absolutely no one who would dare to peep here, and there were no stewards or servants here. Cui Shi quickly jumped out of the carriage and walked to the shaft. He respectfully helped the old steward down from the shaft and said, "Thank you, father." It turned out that the old steward, who was still hunched, was the true leader of the Cui family. Elder Cui, who was about to turn 100, was the ancestor of the entire Qinghe County. Elder Cui waved his hand and said, "I'm just going to see someone, what's so hard about it?" Cui Shi helped Elder Cui into the small building. Inside the building, there was a study room with extremely simple decorations. The windows on all 4 sides were covered with extremely thick cloth, preventing the autumn light from seeping in from the outside, making the room appear particularly dark. Vaguely, one could see 6 seats along the wall, on which sat 6 white-haired old men. Seeing Elder Cui enter, the 6 white-haired old men slowly stood up and bowed. Their movements were slow, not because they wanted to express their dissatisfaction at waiting for a long time, but because they were indeed too old. Elder Cui sat in the round chair directly above, took the towel that Cui Shi had personally heated and placed it on his face. Then he remained silent, waiting for the hot air from the towel to seep into his tired pores. The 6 old men slowly sat down and waited in silence. There was not a trace of dissatisfaction. After Elder Cui was done, he began to wash his face. He carefully and forcefully scrubbed his old face. As the warm towel rubbed, the wrinkles on his face deepened. Then he leaned back in the chair, and his old face was completely hidden in the darkness. An old man said, "You've given the academy enough face by going personally." Elder Chui said, "We can afford to offend the empress, but can we afford to offend the academy? Furthermore, the core disciples of the headmaster rarely step foot in the mortal world. It's rare for one to enter the human realm, so of course we have to take a good look. It's not convenient for us to go to Chang, but since he's here in Qinghe, how can we not see it with our own eyes?" An old man asked in confusion, "Why not just send the visiting card and see it directly?" Sending the visiting card doesn't necessarily mean seeing the person. Even if you see the person, you won't see his attitude. What attitude? The academy's attitude. The academy's attitude used to be impartial, but since Ningke killed Xiahou, their attitude will naturally be biased towards Princess Liu. They can't possibly still support the empress. Elder Chui shook his head and said, "There are many kinds of attitudes. The ownership of the dragon chair is only one of them." An old man asked doubtfully, "The problem now is whether Ningke's attitude can represent the academy's." Elder Chui very naturally cupped his hands and bowed towards the northern sky. He said, "Since the headmaster has allowed his young disciple to enter the human realm, then he has expressed his approval. What is Ningke's attitude that you've seen?" "He's a very proud and cold young man." Old Master Chui seemed to have thought of something. After saying this, he sank into a long period of silence. When his aged voice rang out once more in the dark study, it felt even more exhausted than before. Moreover, it carried a chill that made one's heart palpitate. Looking at his attitude is more like looking at him as a person. In recent years, many strange changes have happened. Haotian above, I don't believe in the underworld invasion at all, but I firmly believe that there will be a big problem in the present world. To Qinghe County, to us aristocrats, perhaps these strange changes indicate that the biggest opportunity in 1,000 years is about to appear. 1,000 years ago, Qinghe County was incorporated into the Tang Empire. 1,000 years later, what kind of opportunity would Qinghe County have? There was dead silence in the study. Both the 6 old men and Chui Shi, who stood quietly by the chair, were shocked by the hidden meaning in Elder Chui's words. Elder Chui continued, "We are loyal to the imperial court, but we have to think about what we can do if the world is in chaos. Regrettably, in the past 100 years, the Empress of Qinghe County is no longer in the palace of Chang'an, and the great divine priest of Qinghe County is no longer in the West Hill Divine Palace. So there is very little we can do. We can only prepare and wait in silence. So we want to see the West Hill Divine Palace's attitude towards us. I want to see Ningke and the Academy's attitude towards us with my own eyes." "What is the Academy's attitude towards us?" "As I said before, Ningke is a very proud and a very cold-blooded person. Perhaps cold-bloodedness is just his personality. But pride is a boring temper that runs through the Academy's 1,000 years of history. It has not changed even today. The Academy has the worship of the entire Tang Empire, and does not need to care about us families. So we have no bargaining chips, no right to be proud, and no room to bargain with the Academy." Elder Chui said indifferently, "The third minister of offerings entered Chang, and died mysteriously. The Academy does not care, and the imperial court did not say anything. It is because Qinghe County is not worthy of their respect. Of course we still have to make the necessary preparations." Elder Chui looked at an old man in the shadows and said, "Has the West Hill replied?" The old man said, "Morning has arrived." The Tao Addict. The great divine priest of judgment has expressed her gratitude in the letter. Elder Chui nodded and said, "To be able to help Yi Hongyu secure her position as the great divine priest of judgment is also a form of good karma." The old man suddenly said, "Perhaps we can suppress this Mr. 13 and show our strength. Only then can we gain more respect from the West Hill Divine Palace. There is no point in doing more meaningless things. I don't care what your descendants in the West Hill Divine Palace have asked you in private. I just want to remind you that Ningke's little handmaiden will become the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace, and his relationship with the great divine priest of judgment is more complicated than we think." Elder Chui leaned forward slightly, revealing his wrinkled face. He looked at the old man and said with an unquestionable attitude, "Most importantly, if the academy does not change, then no power in this world has the right to change. Everyone can only wait." Everyone in the building understood that the academy in this sentence was not referring to the academy, but the headmaster of the academy. So they kept silent, and then someone finally raised a question in the silence. "When I was very young, I knew that there was a mountain in the academy. Now that I am in my 80s, that mountain still stands in the south of Chang'an. How long do we have to wait?" Elder Chui cupped his hands and bowed to the north again. He said, "The headmaster has not left this world, so we can only keep waiting. Even if we cannot wait, our sons and grandsons will. No matter how great a person is, he cannot resist the laws of time. There will come a day when he returns to the Haotian divine light." There was silence in the study. Suddenly, someone asked in a trembling voice, "What if the headmaster never dies?" Elder Chui's body stiffened slightly. In the dark shadows, one could faintly see a self-deprecating smile on his old face. Then he sighed softly and said, "If that is the case, then we can only wait forever. We will wait with incomparable respect and meekness. Even if we are dogs, we have to pretend that we have been raised." The topic came to an end at this point. In this world, countless conversations, countless conspiracies, and countless paths would be forced to an abrupt end in the end. Because at the end was a mountain, and that mountain's name was the headmaster of the academy. The 6 white-haired old men left the small building and returned to their respective manors. They continued to be the masters of their families, or old dogs with 1,000-year suppressed dream. Elder Chui and Chui Shi did not leave. "If such a day really comes, my name will probably be engraved on the pillar of shame in history," Elder Chui said. "But your name may also be recorded at the very beginning of the history books," Chui Shi said. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:13. At the end of the conversation, Chui Shi could not help but ask his father the question that had been lingering in his mind. "You said that Ningke was a proud and cold-blooded person. I have a different opinion. In recent years, the news from Chang'an, including the princess's residence, says that this person looks clear but is actually extremely shameless. He is very good at flattery, so both the headmaster and His Majesty love him. How can such a person be called proud?" Elder Chui smiled and did not speak. Chui Shi laughed bitterly and continued, "All right, even if this person learned to be proud in the 2nd floor of the academy, where did his cold-bloodedness come from? I always thought that the information from the military ministry did not count. He could even maintain a good relationship with Yi Hongyu. In my opinion, Ningke is really good at politics and is very practical." Elder Chui said, "It is impossible to see a person clearly just by looking at his resume and listening to his stories. That is why I insisted on seeing him with my own eyes. Even though it was just a brief glance, it was enough." Chui Shi was slightly stunned. Everyone knew that Ningke was going to the Lang Temple, but he did not go with the diplomatic mission. Even though he stayed in the best inn in Yongguan City, he did not have any servants with him. I only saw him and that famous little handmaiden of his. I saw him holding a cup of tea but not drinking it. I saw him talking to you with vigilance even though he seemed to be carefree. However, I didn't see that he loved peace and quiet." Elder Chui said, "This is a habit that is engraved in his bones. This can only mean that he is an extremely cautious young man. At the same time, he is also a person who does not know how to write the word trust. I even think that, other than the handmaiden, he might not even completely trust the headmaster." Chui Shi was silent. Old Master Chui looked at the thick black curtains on the window and thought of the young man in the inn. He sighed and said, "He doesn't even trust a teacher like the headmaster. Such a person can't just be described as cold. If there are major changes in the future, you must remember to make the West Hill promise that they must first eliminate this young man. Otherwise, we may have to pay an unimaginable price." 2 secret letters from Qinghe County arrived in Chang'an City. A letter was sent to the Southern Gate Temple outside the Imperial City through the secret guard system of the Tang Empire. The recipient of the letter was Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire. After a while, He Mingqi walked out of the southern gate temple. He looked at the clear sky and thought that it might rain later. He clamped the yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit and boarded the carriage. Under the guidance of the steward, He Mingqi walked into the depths of the princess mansion and came to the balcony that was very famous in Chang'an's social circle. He greeted Li Yu, who was lying on the couch. Li Yu frowned slightly and waved her hand to signal the nanny to take away Buqi, who was writing calligraphy. Then she asked He Mingqi to sit down and asked, "There seems to be some problems." He Mingqi did not sit down. This seemingly inconspicuous action meant that Li Yu's perception was not wrong. There was indeed something wrong, and it was not a small problem. He took out the letter from his sleeve and handed it over. Li Yu took the letter and tore open the cover. She was slightly startled when she saw the familiar handwriting on the paper. When she saw the contents of the letter, she could not help but frown even more. The letter was written to the nation master, Li Qingshan. In the letter, he mentioned what he had seen in Qinghe County, especially the test that the Cui family had made through the House of Red Sleeves, and the old steward who had visited him at the inn. The clans of Qinghe County were now the biggest support for Li Yu and her brother in the imperial court. If she wanted to help her brother ascend to the throne, she needed the approval of the academy the most. However, she could not do so without the help of Qinghe County. Li Yu did not know Ning Kei's intentions in writing this letter, but she vaguely understood why the nation master had passed this letter to her. She frowned slightly and said, "Sometimes I don't really understand the actions of those old people. I can only say that these things have nothing to do with me." He Mingqi nodded and said, "I will bring your words back to the Southern Gate Temple." Li Yu raised her head and looked at him quietly. She asked, "The nation master did not need to show this letter to me. He could have brought it directly into the palace and given it to my father or her majesty." He Mingqi smiled slightly and said, "As your disciple, I am not very clear about what you mean. However, since the things in Qinghe County have nothing to do with you, I think you will be very happy." The meaning of this sentence was very obscure, and could even be said to have no meaning at all. However, as a person involved in the situation, Li Yu vaguely caught a certain trend in it. Her eyes slightly brightened. "I thank the nation master for his trust." The second letter from Qinghe County was sent to the academy. Professor Huang he looked at the words on the envelope and smiled. He did not open the envelope and let someone take it to the back of the mountain. The person who read the letter was second brother. He was beside the headmaster when he read the letter. Second brother respectfully bowed to the headmaster and said, "Youngest brother has found some problems." The headmaster's attention was on the small yellow croaker that was being fried on the iron plate. He casually asked, "Is it serious?" Second brother thought for a moment and said, "There are only 2 people in the Knowing Destiny state in Qinghe County. It is not serious." The headmaster said, "In that case, why are you still bothering me? Can't you see that I am busy?" Second brother was slightly startled and said, "How to deal with it?" The headmaster said, "Your youngest brother is cooking fish by the Daming Lake to understand Tao, but he still has not understood the truth of the world. Whether fish is fried or cooked, it is ultimately used for eating." Second brother understood and said, "Then we will wait for them to jump the beam." The headmaster suddenly thought of something and his expression slightly froze. He forgot to take out the bamboo spatula from the pot, and the edge of the bamboo spatula gradually became scorched. The small yellow croaker also began to emit a burnt smell. After an unknown amount of time, he smiled and said, "If the fisherman dies, it doesn't mean that we can't catch fish. If the cook dies, it doesn't mean that we can't fry fish. The beam can't support the broken house forever. When the beam is broken, people will jump from it. Although this jump is not the same as the other jump, clowns will always be clowns." Ning Kei did not know that the great ancestor of Qinghe County had such a deep and serious evaluation of him. After Sang Sang confirmed that there was something wrong with the old steward, he immediately wrote 2 letters back to Chang, and did not think about it anymore. He ranked last in the back of the mountain of the academy. Above him were the headmaster of the academy and other powerful senior brothers and sisters. They would deal with the problem in Qinghe County, so he did not need to worry about it. On that day, He took Sang Sang and left Yongguan City in the black horse carriage. 2 days later, they stopped in front of a ferry. There were no blind thieves who came to rob them, and no stupid officials who wanted to collect taxes. What blocked the way of the horse carriage was a steaming water surface with boundless autumn reeds. The lake in front of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire sounded very ordinary. It was called the Great Lake. Only those who had been to the Great Lake could feel the majesty of this simple name. The lake was so big that no other word in the world could be qualified to describe it except for the word great. It was just like the Yellow River in the further south. The Great Lake was vast and boundless. Even birds could not cross it in one breath. If there was no ferry, even the most powerful cultivator would not be able to cross it. This was the largest lake in the world, lying between the two most powerful countries in the world. It was like Haotian had created a buffer between the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom. It brought peace to the people of the world, but it also brought many inconveniences. There were all kinds of ferries for goods and people to flow between the north and the south. When the water vapor dissipated, countless sails could be seen behind the autumn reeds. The scenery was magnificent and beautiful, but the black horse carriage could only stop by the Great Lake and wait, because the road leading to the South Jin Kingdom had been cordoned off. Several warships of the Tang Navy were waiting for the arrival of the diplomatic mission. Ning Ke had many ways to ignore the martial law and leave quietly. However, regardless of whether it was for the sake of peace or if he was as cold and cautious as Elder Chui had described him to be, waiting for the diplomatic corps to travel with him would be more appropriate than taking out his waist token to reveal his identity and letting the Tang Navy clear the way for him. Fortunately, the scenery of the Great Lake was pleasant enough, and the diplomatic mission did not make him wait for too long. Just when he was about to get tired of looking at the autumn reeds and eating the raw fish in the lake, the diplomatic mission arrived. On the warship of the Tang Navy, Ning Ke saw the head of the diplomatic mission for the first time. It was the Zhenshi General Xian Zhilong, who was known for his weak martial arts but amazing intelligence. The main hull of the warship was empty. Ning Ke and Xian Zhilong sat opposite each other. Because of their status, it was difficult to distinguish who was stronger and who was weaker. The Zhenshi general was not simple. This was Ning Ke's first impression of Xian Zhilong. He looked at the man who looked like a woman and had a scholarly temperament and said in his heart, "I work for Her Highness. To be more precise, if His Majesty leaves, I will be loyal to Prince Li Huan. You don't have to look at me like this. After all, this matter will not be a secret forever." Xian Zhilong looked at him and said with a smile, "When Her Highness tried to let me replace Xiaoho's position, this secret was no longer a secret. And I believe that now that the Empress in the palace has tried her best to make His Majesty drive me into this diplomatic mission, she should have already investigated my relationship with the previous Empress." It was a very open and honest conversation, but it reminded Ning Ke of the opening remarks of the master of the Chui family in Yongguan City. So he smiled and said directly, "I don't know." Xian Zhilong said, "Before Empress Ren Xiao married into the palace, I was a manservant who led her horse." Ning Ke said, "This relationship is very deep." Xian Zhilong looked into his eyes and said, "And I have a good relationship with Chao Xiaoshu." Ning Ke said, "What do you want to say?" Xian Zhilong said, "I want to make a good impression on you." Ning Ke said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs. Moreover, you are already one of the few bigwigs in the military. I don't think it is meaningful for you to make a good impression on me." Xian Zhilong smiled and said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs, but it never includes those who have entered the human realm. If you can't do anything, why did the headmaster ask you to enter the human realm?" He suddenly leaned forward and lowered his voice. He said mysteriously, "Su sure is old." Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "It seems that I have underestimated your ambition, and you have overestimated me. Don't forget that I am now the most unpopular person in the Tang military." Xian Zhilong smiled and said, "I welcome you very much. I have a runny nose on one side and diarrhea on the other. It is said that I have the legendary gastrointestinal flu again. Who knows? In any case, I am sweating like rain and my whole body stinks. But it does not affect my brain. That is good. I cry silently. Am I finally beginning to act sad again? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 5:14. Ningke did not answer because he did not know how to. However, Xianzhilong's mention of Cao Shaoshu and Liu made him feel less awkward when he asked the following question. His Majesty must know that you once held the horse for Empress Ren Xiao. I don't believe the rumors in the court, so I want to know why His Majesty wants you to go to the Lank Temple. Xianzhilong looked at him and said, all the countries gathered in Lank, of course, not just for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. They also want to discuss the war with the Desolate Man next year. Ningke frowned slightly and thought of the continuous battles in the wilderness over the past 2 years. He said confusedly, the left king's palace was plowed by the Desolate Man and then weakened by the Divine Hall Coalition Army and Ho Xiaoho. Now they have no power to take back the grasslands from the Desolate Man. I can't think of any reason for the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom to fight for the left king's palace. Wouldn't it be better to let the Desolate Man live peacefully in the wilderness? If it did not involve the old story between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Devil's Doctrine, there was no problem with what he said. As the saying goes, it is better for the Taoist to die than for the left king's palace. No matter how miserable the left king's palace was, as long as the Desolate Man did not continue to move south and affect the Central Plains countries, who would be willing to face such a powerful enemy? For the West Hill Divine Palace, they don't want to see the Desolate Man tribe have rich grasslands and live there. That would mean the resurrection of the Devil's Doctrine. For the Central Plains countries, we are also afraid of the Desolate Man's reproduction. Without the control of the weather in the far north, the Desolate Man will have a large number of children. Their children will continue to have children, so they will need more and more grasslands. They will drive the herdsmen of the left king's palace to the south, and then they may even have a war with the Golden Palace. What will happen in the end? Just like 1,000 years ago, the Desolate Man will become strong again and fight with the Tang Empire. Xianzhilong looked at him and said with a smile, since there will be a war sooner or later, why not make them weaker while they are still weak? From an emotional point of view, Ningke had no reason to be hostile to the Desolate Man because his only niece was a Desolate Man. He had already joined the devil, so it was even less possible for him to be wary of the devil's doctrine like the Haotian Taoism. He said, this may be decades or even centuries later. Xianzhilong said, even if it's thousands of years, it still starts from this moment. Ningke had to admit that this sentence was very convincing, but he still did not intend to change his opinion. He had been to the wilderness before and knew that the seemingly barren land was actually quite fertile. It was enough to support many people. Earlier, Xianzhilong had mentioned the bloody war between the Tang Empire and the Desolate Man 1,000 years ago. In fact, that war was not because the two sides needed to fight for living space, but because the continent needed to establish a new overlord. Therefore, in his opinion, unless something changed, the Desolate Man had no reason to continue moving south. As soon as the word change appeared in his mind, he suddenly thought of the dreams he had and the 2 conversations he had with the headmaster. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Xianzhilong noticed his strange behavior. The cabin was quiet, and only the faint sound of the lake water hitting the side of the ship could be heard. Ningke suddenly asked, do you believe in the underworld invasion? Xianzhilong's expression froze slightly, then he laughed at himself and said, of course I don't believe it. Ningke looked into his eyes and said, in recent years, Chang'an has become colder than before. Xianzhilong said, the winters where I fed the horses when I was young were colder. Ningke said, you know that's not what I mean. Xianzhilong said, I have been in the West all these years. Ningke said, then why did the Desolate Man move south? Xianzhilong was silent. After a long time he suddenly laughed and said, perhaps a legend will always be a legend. Even if it becomes true, it should be something that the legendary places like the second floor of the academy have to worry about. As soldiers of the Empire, we don't need to think too much. If the underworld invasion really comes one day, as long as His Majesty gives the order, the Tang Empire's cavalry will naturally respond. This was the standard answer of a Tang soldier. Ning-Ke was not surprised. However, he was one of the few people in the world who had heard the headmaster say that the night came from the north, so he had to think more. Especially when he thought about how the Lang Temple Conference involved the use of troops against the desolate man. In the next few years, the wilderness in the north would be flooded with blood. It was becoming more and more like the dream he had once had. The coldness that lingered in his body and could not be dispelled became stronger and stronger. Xian Zhilong obviously wanted to have a long talk with him, but Ning-Ke was in a bad mood. Because of his inexplicable vigilance, he directly refused and walked out of the cabin. Xian Zhilong walked to the window and watched Ning-Ke get off the warship and walk along the lake shore to another warship. Xian Zhilong raised his eyebrows and his eyes revealed a complicated emotion. The House of Red Sleeves song and dance troupe traveled with the Tang Empire's official delegation, so it was naturally convenient. Especially after Ning-Ke showed his attitude, the girls were treated even better. They were arranged to have their own warship. Where there were girls, there would be liveliness. But today the ship was extremely quiet. The beautiful girls were sitting obediently in their chairs. They seemed to be looking down, but in fact they could not suppress the curiosity in their hearts. They kept glancing at the two girls who were talking with the corner of their eyes. Xiao Chao held Song Song's hand and pouted. She looked like a duckling looking for fish in the reeds. She said pitifully, "This is the first time I left Chong, and you did not accompany me. Do you still treat me as a friend?" Sang Sang only had 3 friends in Chang'an. They were Li Yu, the princess of the Tang Empire, Tang Xiaotang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, and Xiao Chao. These 3 friends were very different in status, but she had never considered these things and treated each of them sincerely. She felt sorry for being complained by Xiao Chao and explained helplessly, "Young master likes peace and quiet. I can't do anything about it. You are already engaged. How can there be a young master?" Xiao Chao looked at her and said angrily, "You have to understand your current status. If you keep calling him young master, that guy will really order you around like a handmaiden." Sang Sang thought to herself that although they were engaged, there was no difference between life and the past. She was used to calling him young master over the past few years. She was not used to calling him by his name. The girls in the cabin finally confirmed their guesses and confirmed Song Song's identity. They also guessed who the guy Xiao Chao was talking about was. They were shocked and could not suppress their excitement. As the saying goes, there are always beauties in every generation. The girls in the House of Red Sleeves had a good income, and it was easy for them to get out of the registry. Hence they changed quickly. Lu Shui's group had already married or entered into business. The girls who went to the Lang Temple this time were all very young. They had heard of the legendary stories of the House of Red Sleeves, but they had never seen it with their own eyes. It was not until they saw how intimate Xiao Chao was with the dark-skinned girl that they were shocked to confirm that the rumors were true. Sang Sang was no longer the inconspicuous handmaiden in the old brush pen shop. Even if the people in Chang and did not know that she was the successor of the divine priest of light, they knew that she was the closest to the princess. They also knew that she was the missing daughter of Zhang Jing, the grand secretary of the Imperial Library. Of course, the most famous identity for Sang Sang was her relationship with Ning Quebec. The engagement between Ning-Ke and Sang Sang was undoubtedly the most sensational event in Chang, and in the past 6 months. One was a student of the 2nd floor of the academy, the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, and also a great calligrapher who was favored by His Majesty. The other was the daughter of Zhang Jing, the grand secretary of the princess, and also the successor of the divine priest. Although it was a simple engagement, it still caused a stir. His Majesty gave them countless gold, silver, and jewelry, and countless ministers came in person. For some people who did not know the inside story, the most shocking scene of the day happened when the West Hill Divine Palace specially sent a senior divine priest to congratulate them and presented them with countless makeup boxes. The senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy naturally had gifts, but in Ning-Ke's eyes, those extremely poor things were not worth mentioning. However, he did not expect that the headmaster of the academy would be the poorest one. He did not even bother to write any words like beautiful girl, and only gave a box of sweet pastries. That guy? Which guy? Ning-Ke walked into the cabin and looked at Xiao Chao. He said, Aunt Jen treats you well and even let you be the foreman. But don't think that you can climb over my head just because you have her support. Xiao Qiao snorted and did not want to talk to him. She just held Song Song's hand tightly. The girls in the cabin guessed his identity and hurriedly stood up and bowed to him. For a moment the flowers were slightly fluttering, and the fragrance was floating. Thinking of the identity and status of this young man, especially the reputation of the great calligrapher, the beautiful girl's eyes gradually became misty and passionate, and they were quite eager to give it a try. Xiao Qiao looked at the somewhat chaotic scene and slightly frowned. She said, "Don't think too much. Go back and ask the sisters in the brothel who can really get close to Ning Quebec. All the girls in Chong, and are not allowed to receive him. This is the iron rule set by Mistress Jian." This iron rule had long become a joke in the House of Red Sleeves, and even in the brothel industry in Chang'an. How could the girls not know this reason? But thinking that they were already out of Chong, and would spend many days in the same boat with Ning Ke on the Great Lake, how could they bear to miss such an opportunity? So their eyes were still blazing. Xiao Qiao looked at Ning Ke and said helplessly, "You are a man with a wife. Can't you be more low-key? So please don't always hold my wife's hand." Ning Ke walked forward with a smile, grabbed Song Song's hand, and took her out of the cabin. The sound of the lake waves gradually stopped, the oil lamp in the cabin dimmed, and the ink on the table swayed gently. The warship left the dock and slowly sailed to the vast Great Lake. Ning Ke looked at the thin letter on the table, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sang Sang looked at the letter in his hand and said seriously, "This is ours." That letter was left by Cui Shi in the inn in Yangguan City before he left a few days ago. The letter was very thin, and there were only 2 pieces of paper in it. A few simple words were written on one piece of paper, and a banknote of 500,000 taels of silver on the other piece of paper. "I know there will be a double payment tomorrow starting from the early morning. Please vote for me just like you voted for Sang Sang. However, there will be no outbreak tomorrow, and there will be no outbreak during the double payment period, and there may even be a break in chapters. I have been sitting from morning to night to write a chapter, and it is really uncomfortable. I will try my best to write. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 515. I recommend a new book, titled Fairy Mountain. The author is an old friend of mine. His writing is skillful and the plot is wonderful. I can guarantee his reputation. You can go and have a look or keep it. You will not lose out. The Cui family was generous enough to give her 500,000 taels of silver on their first meeting. It was hard to imagine. Such a large amount of silver was enough to do many things in the world. Sang Sang did not know why the Cui family had sent so much silver, but she knew that if Ning Ke accepted it, he would be in big trouble. However, she did not even think about it and thought that he should accept it. This was 500,000 taels of silver. She had never seen so much money in her life. "Don't accept it? We will be punished by God like Mr. Ku." Ning Ke read the letter and knew the Cui family's intention. He explained, "Your father's first wife is Cui Shi's cousin. She is now in Qinghe Prefecture. That year, it was this woman who sent you out of the Zhang mansion with the intention of killing you. The Cui family gave you this silver to ask you to forgive that woman, or at least not implicate the Cui family. Therefore, this silver is not ours but yours." Sang Sang was slightly stunned and said, "This is worth 500,000 taels of silver?" Ning Ke said, "If you were the daughter of the Grand Secretary Zheng Jing, 500,000 taels of silver would be a bit expensive. But now you are the successor of the Divine Priest of Light. In the future, if you remember these things, even the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture will not want to face the anger of the great Divine Priest of West Hill." After understanding the origin of this thin note, Sang Sang became a little hesitant. She looked at Ning Ke and asked seriously, "Then do you think I should accept it?" Ning Ke said, "It depends on whether you want to forgive them." Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forgive them. But I don't want to find that woman for revenge." Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked why. Sang Sang said, "Because without that woman, I would not have been found by you." Ninkei laughed and said, "If that is the case, then keep the note and let the Chui family feel at ease." Sang Sang said worriedly, "Will it cause any trouble?" Ninkei said, "What trouble can there be?" Sang Sang said, "Isn't it said that if you accept money from others, your hands will be short?" Ninkei raised his right hand and said, "My hand won't become shorter. This silver is just to buy you to calm your anger. If the aristocratic families in Qinghe County really want to use this money to buy me to do something, do you think I'll just do it obediently?" Sang Sang said worriedly, "It's not good to take the money and do nothing, right?" Ninkei looked at her and asked, "Is money more important or credibility?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "It depends on how much money it is." Ninkei gently waved the thin silver note in his hand. Sang Sang looked at the notes between his fingers and said without hesitation, "This is more important." Then she came to her senses and said awkwardly, "Is it a disease to love money so much?" Ninkei said, "Loving money is not a disease, because not having money is fatal." In fact, there was no need for any reason at all. Whether it was him or Sang Sang, it was impossible for them to return the 500,000 taels of silver notes that they had received, even if it involved something more troublesome than Qinghe County, even if they had to pay the price of credibility and honor. That was because they had suffered enough from not having money since they were young. Their love or greed for money had long become an inviolable instinct. If this was a disease, then they would definitely not be willing to cure it. Due to the difficult life they had since childhood, Ninkei and Sang Sang had developed some instinctive living habits. Apart from their love of money, they were also sensitive to danger and would jump away like rabbits if they could foresee trouble in advance. They would never cause any trouble, which were also some of the most distinctive habits. Therefore, in the following days, Ninkei did not leave the cabin as the battleship slowly moved south on the surface of the Great Swamp. Xianzhilong's ship invited him several times, but he gently but firmly refused. Xianzhilong was not a simple person. That was why he had so simply revealed his camp and thoughts to Ninkei in the conversation that day. The more complicated he was, the more Ninkei did not want to communicate with him, because he did not want to participate in the important matter of the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. As a representative of the Academy entering the human realm, he was qualified to express his opinion on the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. However, he did not have any opinion. His only opinion was that the current emperor was so wise that he could choose whoever he wanted to succeed the throne in the future. As for whether the Academy should play a role in it, or whether it needed to gain some kind of benefit from it, the Academy really did not need it. No matter who became the Tang Empire's emperor in the future, he must maintain respect for the Academy. Moreover, Ninkei really did not care which prince would be able to sit on the dragon throne in the future. The core disciples of the headmaster of Academy, who were on the second floor, naturally stood higher than the people on the ground. They could see further and did not care about the red dust that was gradually blown up by the wind. What Ninkei cared about now had gradually gone beyond the scope of the human world and entered the realm of the outside world. It had become something that was unknown to the world, but would affect the entire world. For example, the underworld invasion. For example, the rumor that he was the son of Yama. For example, Song Song's illness. It was already autumn. The autumn wind, which should have been clear and slightly dry, was steamed by the boundless waters of the Great Swamp. It was moist and refreshing when it entered the window. Ninkei looked at the lines that looked like cursive characters on the fu paper slowly forming. With his sharp eyes, he confirmed that the black gold powder mixed in the fu ink was evenly distributed in the lines. He put the brush in his hand on the inkstone and turned to look at the lake outside the window. He was silent and no one knew what he was thinking. The more he thought about the unknown, the more vigilant he became. He always felt that something was happening in the unseen world, and that it seemed to be related to himself in the Academy. Because the words in the unseen world were too ecstatic, he once again thought of the legend of the underworld invasion. Even the headmaster of Academy could not find the passage of the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld in the Lank Temple. He thought that it was even more impossible for him to find it. But what if he was really the son of Yama? The rumor about Ninkei's identity had already spread in the world. He did not know what the Vedantas of the Buddhism sect who had wanted to kill him would do now. nor did he know what was waiting for him in the Lank Temple. As the lake water gently swayed, they got closer to the Lank Temple. He became more and more silent. If he acted according to his instincts, because of the growing vigilance or strange omen in his heart, Ning-Ke might not hesitate to take Sang-Sang to stop the journey and return to Chang, and as soon as possible. But he did not do so. Instead, he let the fleet speed up. Because Song-Song's illness suddenly relapsed. When they left Chang and Song-Song's cold illness seemed to have healed, she went all the way south to bask in the sun, and it seemed that even the root of the illness was gone. But after they boarded the ship, Ning-Ke was surprised to find that the pair of little feet in his arms every night were getting colder and colder. What made him even more uneasy was that basking in the sun and cultivating divine skills seemed to be unable to effectively suppress the cold qi in Song-Song's body. Sang-Sang did not feel the changes in her body, or she felt it, but she was worried that Ning-Ke would be worried, so she did not say anything and continued as usual every day. Ning-Ke was worried that she would be worried, so he did not tell her. He began to pay attention to whether his wine bag was full. Every night, he quietly untied his clothes and placed Song-Song's cold little feet in the warmest place. Then he began to think about what the headmaster had said before he left. Only now did he understand why the headmaster wanted him to take Sang-Sang to the Lank Temple. It seemed that only the elders of the Buddhism sect who lived in seclusion could cure Sang-Sang. Because he understood, he did not understand. He could not understand why even the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy could not cure Sang-Sang. Was it still an illness that the headmaster could not cure? Since he could not understand, Ning-Ke stopped thinking about it. Anyway, no matter what the process was, the final result was already determined. He had to cure Sang-Sang, and then he had to go to the Lank Temple to face the mercy or thunder of the Buddhism sect. He might even have to face the moment when his identity as the son of Yama was confirmed. Walking in the great swamp, facing the lake wind, the surface of the water was dotted with white stars, and seagulls occasionally flew by. Under the double pressure of vigilance against the unknown and worry about Song-Song's health, Ning-Ke cultivated silently. He kept writing talismans, meditating, and cultivating the Great Spirit every day. Amidst the light of the lake, the originally indistinct threshold seemed to have become a little closer, a little clearer. In the world, what people had to do often meant an opportunity for a breakthrough. For Ning-Ke, there were only a few things in the world that he had to do, such as Song-Song's safety. Long-Qing threatened him with Sang-Sang at the Daming Lake in the wilderness, and he broke into the see-through state. Then he shot Long-Qing, who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, into a cripple. Now in the Great Swamp in autumn, he once again encountered an opportunity to break into the knowing destiny state. But this time he did not even notice it. As the saying goes, a country in chaos produces a loyal minister, and a poet in grief and indignation. Sang-Sang could help Ning-Ke break out of the state. In the depths of the West Hill Mountains, far away from the Great Swamp, Prince Long-Qing was also waiting for his own opportunity. He did not know if the opportunity would appear, or when it would appear. But he believed that the Abbey Dean had saved him from the state of the living dead by the South Sea, and sent him to the Jisho Abbey, which was regarded as a holy land by all cultivators in the world, was a great opportunity for him. Coming to the Jisho Abbey allowed him to see the possibility of becoming a powerhouse again. It allowed him to vaguely find a chance for success, and ignited his burning desire. He thought that this was an opportunity because these were what he thought in his heart, and all the thoughts in his heart were the will of Haotian. However, there was always a distance between reality and ideal. Just like when he was collecting fish at the fishing port in the South Sea, he saw the wooden plank between the fishing boat and the dock. It seemed that he could easily board the fishing boat as long as he walked on it, but in fact the plank was full of slippery fish scales and internal organs, and it was easy to slip and fall into the sea. Long-Qing wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He knew that another of his ribs had been broken. He looked at the horrifying old Taoist priest who had only half of his body left on the snow couch. The old Taoist priest was screaming and seemed like he could beat him to death at any time. Pain and confusion appeared in his eyes. How long would his life as a servant last? Where was the opportunity? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:16. Longqing had been a handyman in the Jishou Abbey for a long time. Every day, he had to climb up the red mountain that was covered in green vines and deliver things to the oddly shaped old Taoist priests in the cave. He was extremely tired every day and had to bear great mental pressure. This was especially so for the old Taoist priest who had been cut in half. The old Taoist priest treated him like a pig and constantly humiliated and tortured him. He was only satisfied when he was injured and vomited blood. Although he was humiliated and tortured, his life was not threatened. After a few days, Longqing guessed that although the old Taoist priests in the cave were somewhat abnormal, they knew his background and did not dare to kill him. Therefore, he continued to endure and sometimes even took the initiative to talk to the old Taoist priests. From the experience given to him by the stories in the books, these old Taoist priests who were imprisoned in the cave like ghosts must be extremely lonely. Therefore, as long as he talked more, he might really be able to cultivate some kind of relationship with these old Taoist priests. Once that happened, it would naturally be of great benefit to him. This kind of hope seemed a little childish and cute. So far, apart from asking him about the things that happened in the cultivation world in the recent decades, the Taoist priests were still constantly mocking his low cultivation state and angrily roaring about how he could enter the abbey when he was so weak. But at least he had obtained some information through these conversations, such as the surname of the disabled old Taoist priest, who had previously made him vomit blood and fly backward with one of his ribs broken. The old Taoist priest surnamed he called himself the Half-Man Taoist, which was obviously not his real name but a painful self-mockery after he had been cut in half. According to seniority, he should be the uncle of the current hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. No wonder he had such an unfathomable state. The Half-Man Taoist's hands were deep in the fur of the snowfield direwolf. His old Taoist robe was fluttering even though there was no wind. His expression was as cold as a stone, but his eyes revealed endless violent pain and despair. Looking at Longqing, who stood up with difficulty while wiping his blood, he said faintly, "On the first day you came, I said that you are a piece of trash. What right do you have to talk to me? Get lost." Longqing did not leave the cave silently like before, because he heard something different from the words of the predecessor from Haotian Taoism. The man was obviously desperate, and he knew what his despair was. So he walked to the bed covered with wolf skin, knelt down and said, "If I was useless, the Abbey Dean would not have let me come here, nor would he have given me the opportunity to meet you." Hearing the Abbey Dean's name, the Half-Man Taoist gradually calmed down. He looked at Longqing, who was kneeling in front of him, and smiled nervously. He said, "But you are a piece of trash." "I'm trash now, but that doesn't mean I'll always be trash," Longqing replied calmly. He lowered his head slightly, and a faint gray luster flashed across his eyes. "Calling you trash is indeed unfair." The Half-Man Taoist looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Being beaten, scolded, and humiliated by me, you still insist on entering the cave every day, which shows that your will is strong enough. Looking at the speed of your injury recovery, it shows that your body has a good foundation. You have been secretly practicing the gray eye, just to find a chance to absorb my power. Whether you want to deceive me or go the way of love, it proves that you are a ruthless person." Hearing these words, Longqing's body shook. He did not expect that the disabled old Taoist in front of him, who seemed to be crazy, had seen through his thoughts from the beginning. Suddenly, endless fear grew in him, and he wanted to turn around and escape from this magnificent but extremely gloomy cave. However, for some unknown reason, perhaps because he was stiff and unable to move, perhaps because he knew that no matter how fast he escaped, he could not be faster than the old Taoist's eyes, or perhaps he just wanted to take a gamble, he did not move. He was still kneeling in front of the old Taoist, but he lowered his head a little more. The gray eye is indeed an amazing skill. After being modified by the predecessors of Taoism, compared with the original Tao Tai demonic skill, it does not need to devour the flesh and blood of the cultivator, but directly absorbs the opponent's psyche power. It is indeed one of the best choices for sneak attacks and plots. The Half-Man Taoist looked up at the top of the cave, as if looking at the sky. He remembered many past events and said slowly, "But in fact, after such modification, it does not look so bloody, so naturally there will be some loss. Compared with Tao Tai, it is difficult to use the psyche power and even spirit suppressed by the gray eye to integrate with your original world, and it will cause many problems in the future. It is not as powerful as the real Tao Tai. It is a pity that the practice of Tao Tai and the Devil's Doctrine has long been lost. Now that the Devil's Doctrine has withered, presumably no one will know it anymore." This powerful old Taoist, whose cultivation state had almost broken through the 5 states, did not know that Master Lotus had secretly recultivated the practice of Tao Tai. Long Qing's expression was slightly cold. He had already seen the relevant records in the Sha handscroll of the Tomes of Arcane, but he did not pay much attention to it. Now that he heard what the Half-Man Taoist said, he knew that it was a very troublesome problem. But now what puzzled him the most was why the Half-Man Taoist did not kill him or drive him away after seeing through his intentions, but began to teach him like a teacher. The Half-Man Taoist withdrew his gaze from the top of the cave and looked down at Long Qing. He said indifferently, "You have a strong will, a good physical body, ambition, ideas, patience, and ruthlessness. It seems that you have all the conditions to be a successful hero. Then do you know why I still say that you are a waste?" "I do not know. A few days ago, I heard about your experience. I know that you used to have a good time, but in the end, you were destroyed by the disciples of the academy. Then let me ask you, what is the most inferior to that disciple of the academy?" Hearing this question, Long Qing was silent for a long time. In fact, he had asked himself this question many times. He could not understand how Ning Ke was better than him. He was once the near-perfect West Hill Divine Son, while Ning Ke was just a soldier at the border of the city of Wei. But he had been continuously defeated by his opponent, and the more he lost, the more miserable he became. What was the answer to this question? "You are not thick-skinned enough." The Half-Man Taoist looked at him and said faintly, "Or in other words, you are still trying to preserve your last pride. You do not understand that to become the most powerful cultivator, you must know when to abandon your pride and sink yourself into the swamp of filth." Long Qing looked up and frowned in confusion. He asked, "I do not think I have anything to be proud of now." The Half-Man Taoist raised his hand and pointed at his knees. He said, "Although you kneel in front of me, in your heart you are still standing." Long Qing said, "Does Ning Ke not have his pride?" The Half-Man Taoist said, "I have never seen Ning Ke and do not know what he has done. But I believe that if he must achieve something, he will definitely give up all the pride hidden in his heart. If he was in the Jisho Abbey now, he would definitely not be like you, climbing the mountain silently every day and trying to use emotional attacks or insidious means to steal my power." Long Qing was a little confused. He asked, "Then what will he do?" The Half-Man Taoist laughed hoarsely. The wrinkles on his wrinkled face were like raw noodles that were about to be pulled apart. He said, "On the first day he entered the cave, he would kneel in front of me and beg me to give him half of my power. But as far as I know, the people in the academy are very proud. That kind of pride is just a facade. It is pride towards heaven, earth, and people. But they will never be proud of themselves. It is just some cheap pride after becoming strong. Those untrustworthy cheese can betray Haotian and join the Devil's Doctrine as long as they can make themselves stronger. There is no pride at all." The Half-Man Taoist roared angrily. His face was red and his trembling right hand danced wildly in the air. It was as if he wanted to grab an untouchable enemy and tear him into countless pieces. Everything in the cave seemed to feel this anger. The snow-white wolf's fur became smoother and smoother. The luminous pearls on the cave walls quietly dimmed. Long Qing knelt in front of the Half-Man Taoist. He felt as if he was about to be burned by this powerful mental power. He used all the strength in his body to prevent his trembling body from collapsing to the ground. The wind suddenly stopped, and the cave returned to a dead silence. The Half-Man Taoist looked at Long Qing and asked slowly, "Do you know who cut me in half at the waist?" His voice was very calm and seemed to be emotionless, but it was faintly filled with endless pain. Long Qing's hands were still trembling slightly. His fingertips were slightly bent and almost scratched. He risked the old Taoist's anger and said in a trembling voice, "It was either the headmaster of the academy or Ku Haoran." The half-man Taoist was slightly startled and asked, "How do you know?" Long Qing said, "Senior, your cultivation should have exceeded the 5 states and had already transcended the mortal realm. In the world, there are only 2 people who can defeat you and injure you so badly." Hearing his answer, the half-man Taoist laughed with endless hatred and said, "You are right. Back then I was cut in half by Ku Haoran. And the old guys hiding in this mountain cave were either injured by Ku Haoran or the headmaster of the academy. Back then I was seriously injured in the battle with Ku Haoran. If I didn't have a secret method to save my life, I would have suffered endless pain and died on the spot. But even though I survived now, I can't forget the pain back then. I can't forget the feeling of watching my intestines flow out with my own eyes. I can't forget the feeling of watching my lower body leave with my own eyes. I can't forget the pain. Although Ku Haoran is already dead, I still can't forget the pain. I can't accept it. I want Ku Haoran to die in pain. So I always want to destroy the academy. However, for the rest of my life, I can only rely on my abnormal upper body to crawl around in this cave like a worm. I'm just a useless person without a butt. How can I destroy the academy?" The half-man Taoist looked at Long Qing, who was kneeling in front of him, and laughed like a madman. He said hopelessly, "The Abbey Dean sent you to me. I thought you had a chance, but I didn't expect you to still be a useless person. Although you have a butt, you are not as good as me without a butt." Long Qing suddenly raised his head and asked, "How can I not become a useless person?" The old Taoist stopped laughing and stared at his eyes. He said faintly, "The so-called strong are those who can pursue power at all costs." Long Qing knelt on the ground and said with a slightly trembling voice, "I chose to cultivate the gray eyes because I wanted to plot against you, or any predecessor of Haotian Taoism in this mountain cave. I thought it was already at all costs. I don't know how to go further." The old Taoist said with a strange smile, "Since you want to do it at all costs, then you should not have any other emotions or positions except for power. Be it pride or belief, you should throw them all away. If one's butt determines one's position, you should be like me now, without a butt at all." Long Qing asked in a low voice, "What about Haotian?" The old Taoist said sternly, "The reason why those B*****s in the academy are so powerful is that they have no belief and no rules. In their eyes, Haotian is not a butt, but a fart. So if you want to defeat the academy, you have to have no belief and no rules. You have to learn to treat Haotian as a fart. Let it go." I laughed wildly for 3 times. I finally wrote it. "Thank you for your photos, thank you for the encouragement from the big girl, thank you for my father's eyes, thank you for your monthly votes. If you still have votes, please continue. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 517. In the wilderness, Long Qing's cultivation had been destroyed by Ning Kei's arrow. He had lost all hope and even tried to give up his faith and walk into the deep night. However, he did not die in the end and did not truly throw himself into the arms of Yama. It was also that desperate experience that made him understand that simple words or actions were not true betrayals. As a firm believer of Haotian, it could be said that it was the most difficult thing in the world to erase his fear and faith towards Haotian from the bottom of his heart. It was like trying to disperse the light from the sky. Long Qing knelt in front of the half-man Taoist and said, "The will of Haotian is too strong. It has long surpassed my will. I have no idea how to erase it." The half-man Taoist asked, "What is the will of Haotian?" Long Qing thought of the conversation between him and the Abbey Dean on the boat in the South Sea and said, "Haotian is omnipresent and omniscient. Everything in the world is under the control of Haotian. Therefore, our thoughts are the will of Haotian." The half-man Taoist did not expect him to have such a deep understanding of the will of Haotian. He nodded with slight admiration and said, "The thoughts are the subjective manifestation of the will of Haotian. However, there must be 2 sides to everything. The will of Haotian also has its objective side. Have you ever felt it?" Long Qing was slightly confused. He thought that the will of Haotian in the objective category was the body of the divine law of Haotian. How could a mortal in the world perceive it? Haotian has no size, but it has infinite size. When it is big, it is like countless oceans. When it is small, it is like thousands of pieces of gravel. Haotian has no shape, but it has countless shapes. Sometimes it is a beast, sometimes it is a human, sometimes it is a tree, sometimes it is a mountain, sometimes it is the sea, sometimes it is the sun, and sometimes it is the world. The half-man Taoist's eyes were slightly drooping. His face, which was like a dead tree, seemed to be plated with a layer of holy light. His voice was emotionless, as if these descriptions of Haotian did not come from his mouth, but originally existed in this world and appeared in the cave through his voice. There was no description of Haotian in the West Hill scriptures, because in the teachings, any attempt to describe Haotian's behavior was extremely disrespectful and blasphemous. This was the first time Long Qing had heard someone describe Haotian. Although the description seemed simple, it made his Taoist heart tremble violently. What made his Taoist heart tremble was not only because he had heard the image of Haotian's divine law, but also because he had finally confirmed a fact. The crippled old Taoist on the bed, who only had half of his body left, had indeed broken through the 5 states. This was because only cultivators who had broken through the 5 states and entered the Tianqi state could be lucky enough to see Haotian's divine law with their own eyes. Only these people were allowed to describe Haotian's appearance. However, a Haotian Taoism predecessor in the Tianqi state was cut in half by a sword. Long Qing could not help but feel that the headmaster of the academy and Ku Haoran were extremely terrifying. The half-man Taoist seemed to know what Long Qing was thinking at this time. He slowly opened his eyes and said, "No matter what form Haotian appears in the world, it must be grand, solemn, and self-evidently great. We cannot be great, we can only be strong." The reason why the powerful and lowly non-believers in the academy could completely erase the will of Haotian was because they had never truly believed in Haotian from the beginning. It is difficult for Haotian Taoism disciples to do this, so I will tell you the true description of Haotian now. Long Qing's voice trembled slightly as he asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because since you cannot erase the will of Haotian, you can only try to forget. You did not even know what Haotian was before, so how could you forget?" The half-man Taoist looked at him and said, "Only by knowing can you forget." Long Qing was deep in thought. He lowered his head and fell into a long silence. After a long time, the luminous pearls on the stone walls of the cave lit up again. The white wolf fur on the soft bed swayed in the wind. He finally raised his head, his expression calm. The half-man Taoist asked with a hint of anxiety, "Have you ever forgotten?" Long Qing asked, "What have I forgotten?" "Ha ha ha ha." The half-man Taoist laughed. He excitedly stretched out his hand and wanted to pat his thigh to vent the pain, despair, and suffering of waiting for so many years. The old Taoist only remembered the fact that he had not forgotten for many years after he slapped his palm heavily into the wolf fur. He had long lost his legs and he also had no buttocks. He was now just a poor deformed old Taoist with only half a body left. So he cried out in pain. The ghost-like mournful cries kept ringing in the quiet cave. Long Qing calmly looked at the old Taoist beating his chest and wrists like a madman, and even occasionally strangling his own throat until his face turned red. It was not until the unpleasant sounds of crying and laughing gradually stopped that he said, "My natal item is a peach blossom." There was a peach blossom on the chest of his Taoist robe, a black peach blossom. The old Taoist narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at him, asking hoarsely, "Why is it a peach blossom?" Long Qing calmly said, "After I entered the no-doubt state, I had never decided on a natal item. Later, when I was studying in the Revelation Institute, I heard the story of the headmaster of the academy going to West Hill to cut down peach blossoms. From then on, I vowed to let peach blossoms bloom all over the world, so peach blossoms became my natal item." Listening to these words, the old Taoist looked at him more and more strangely. Long Qing's expression became calmer and calmer. He smiled and said, "At the beginning of cultivation, my dream was to lead Haotian Taoism to defeat the academy. These years, with so many things happening, especially the appearance of Ning Ke, my idea became more direct and firm. I will devote all my life to the great cause of destroying the academy and the Tang Empire." The old Taoist looked into his eyes and saw many things. He said, "Very good." As soon as he finished speaking, the old Taoist heavily hit Long Qing's left chest with his palm. A powerful force gushed out from the palm and instantly penetrated his muscles and ribs, stabbing straight into his heart. Long Qing's face suddenly turned pale, and his eyebrows were raised like swords. He seemed to be in extreme pain, but he did not think of avoiding from the beginning. At this time he did not try to escape from this skinny and horrifying palm, because he knew that the state difference between him and the old Taoist was like heaven and earth. No matter how he tried to escape, it would be futile. And he firmly believed that the old Taoist had previously described Haotian to make him forget Haotian, not to kill him with one palm. The half-man Taoist's skinny palm was like a vertical blue lake that had shrunk many times. There was a very quiet aura condensed on the palm. It was as viscous as the lake water, but it gave people a sense of cleanliness. It was impossible to tear it apart, and one did not want to tear it apart. "Your eyes are too black and white." The half-man Taoist stared into Long Qing's eyes and said. The expression on his skinny face did not show whether he was crying or laughing. Long Qing's body trembled slightly. From the old Taoist's words, he confirmed that he had made the right bet. His expectations were about to become reality. He looked into the old Taoist's eyes, filled with gratitude and shock. In the blink of an eye, his black and white pupils began to undergo an extremely strange change. The boundary between his black pupils and white pupils began to blur. His black pupils grew fainter and fainter, while his white pupils grew darker and darker. They grew closer and closer to each other until they became a completely uniform gray. As Long Qing's eyes turned gray, a strong attraction penetrated his ocean of qi and tightly sucked the half-man Taoist's skinny palm to his left chest. The half-man Taoist had expected this, and there was no change in his expression. In a moment, the lake in the skinny palm became a vast ocean and ferociously poured into Long Qing's body. Long Qing trembled violently, and blood began to ooze from the corner of his mouth. Invisible wounds appeared in his internal organs, and his eyes were also bloodshot. However, in the mix of black and white, they were gradually washed into a monotonous and palpitating gray. He slowly closed his eyes. A Tianqi strongman who had surpassed the 5 states, even if he was seriously injured, and even if he only had half of his psyche power, was still not a gift that Long Qing could easily accept. At this moment, Long Qing felt that his body was like a leather bag filled with alcohol, about to explode in the next moment. He felt that his chest was already bulging like a mountain, about to burst in the next moment. He felt that his internal organs had long been destroyed into minced meat by the powerful aura. Fortunately, he forcibly maintained a trace of clarity in his Taoist heart. He woke up at the moment before the disillusionment came. He remembered that the perception, consciousness, experience, knowledge, and psyche power that he had endured at this moment were all intangible and intangible. All of this was an illusion, and there was no change in his body. He knew that he had to endure this pain in order to obtain a new life. A stronger new life. The wrinkles on the old Taoist's face seemed to have deepened, but also seemed to have lightened. Only half of his body was left. He leaned forward slightly on the edge of the bed, and his face was very close to Long Qing's. Looking at Long Qing's closed eyes and struggling to support himself, he smiled and said in a trembling voice, "Absorb more, absorb more." His laughter was very unpleasant, and his smile was very strange. It was full of love and greed, and it felt extremely abnormal. It was like an old demon in a mountain village at night, feeding its big-headed son. At this moment, dozens of extremely powerful auras penetrated the hard stone walls and quietly came to this cave. Each powerful aura represented a strong man of Haotian Taoism, in a cave on this mountain peak. These strong men of Haotian Taoism did not interfere with this strange transfer of power. Instead, they quietly watched. It could be sensed that these auras were very calm, but there were extremely complicated emotions hidden in them. Long Qing was unaware of this. His pale face appeared very strange and excited scarlet, and his throat kept moving up and down, and there came the sound of da-da. He was like a newborn cub, closing his eyes and frowning, desperately sucking all the milk that he could suck, extremely satisfied and intoxicated. The old Taoist looked at Long Qing, And there was also a satisfied and intoxicated smile on his face. Perhaps he was too excited, or for some other reason, the waist cavity that was cut by the sword years ago began to ooze out, wetting the snow-white fur mattress. Absorb more. Don't worry. Suddenly, the smile on the old Taoist's face disappeared instantly. He stared at Longqing and said with a voice as cold as steel, "You can only take what I give you. If I don't give it to you, you can't take it." Longqing still closed his eyes, as if he could not hear what he said. He really looked like a starving cub. "I wish everyone a happy Mid-Autumn festival. I wish everyone's health and happiness." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 518. Receiving no response, the half-man Taoist's eyes were filled with endless shock and incredulity. He scolded sternly, "How dare you?" Longqing still did not respond. A newborn beast's individual strength was naturally extremely weak. However, its desire for lust and the vitality it released was precisely at its most powerful and boundless moment. Longqing was the cub. He closed his eyes and sucked in everything he could, calmly, greedily, hungrily, and innocently. The black peach blossom in his lapel became darker and darker. His chest seemed to become a bottomless abyss, sucking air from the old Taoist's palm. The old Taoist's face suddenly became even more haggard, and his body became thinner and smaller, even faintly looking like a hunchback. He had placed all his hopes on Longqing, who was kneeling in front of him, and was even willing to pour half of his cultivation into Longqing's body. However, at this moment, he found that something was wrong, and he even faintly felt great fear. He was the half-man Taoist. Even if he lost half of his cultivation, he could still survive. However, with Longqing's greedy and terrifying appearance, how could he give up? If this situation continued, even if he was a powerhouse in the Tianqi state who had surpassed the 5 states, he would not be able to hold on for long. He would die. Living like a rat in a dark cave after being cut in half at the waist was a terrible mental torture. But it was still living. In the shadow of death, no one would really believe that it was better to be dead than alive. It was the same for the half-man Taoist. After being cut in half by Ku Haoran's sword, he had survived with great difficulty. Decades later, he naturally would not be willing to die like this. "You're too greedy." The half-man Taoist felt the psyche power surging out of his body like a tide. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable anger. A strong aura was released from his body. The scrawny palm that had fallen on Longqing's left chest like a blue lake suddenly became a mountain, pressing forward. There were several crisp cracking sounds. 5 ribs on Longqing's left chest broke. He spat out a mouthful of blood, wetting the black peach blossom on his chest. Then he woke up. Longqing slowly raised his head and looked at the old Taoist who was close at hand. He said indifferently, "Since it has already begun, why should it end like this? Since you have already absorbed so much, why don't you absorb more?" The half-man Taoist knew that he had already awoken from his almost instinctive state of madness. He did not expect him to speak in such a manner, and could not help but become angrier. However, before his anger could turn into violent flames, it was already replaced by fear and confusion. Earlier, his palm had fallen like a mountain and broken several of Longqing's ribs, but it did not leave Longqing's chest. Instead, it was stained with blood and sank deep into Longqing's chest. There was a hole in Longqing's chest. The half-man Taoist's palm reached into the hole through the Taoist robe and sank halfway into his forearm. There was a black peach blossom stained with blood. The half-man Taoist wanted to pull his hand out, but he could not. He could clearly feel that his palm and half of his forearm had come into contact with the slippery and sticky internal organs. The faintly wriggling flesh and blood seemed to be coming to life, making him feel extremely disgusted and cold. The hole in Longqing's body was like a quagmire. The quagmire was filled with mud that was countless feet deep. The mud was extremely sticky, and at the bottom of the quagmire was a dark and endless abyss. The half-man Taoist felt that he was struggling in this quagmire. Countless poisonous miasma continuously seeped into his pores, and the cold and filthy black mud was gradually covering his facial features. After a moment, his body was about to be swallowed by this black quagmire. Although his light and intangible soul could pass through the mud, it would eventually enter the endless abyss and endure hundreds of millions of years of loneliness. That was death. The half-man Taoist became more and more stooped. It was obvious to the naked eye that his body had shrunk. He could not help but tremble violently. He looked at Longqing, his eyes filled with fear, anger and confusion. He did not know what had happened and why he could not stop this trash in front of him from taking everything from him. Then he saw Longqing's eyes. It was a very calm pair of eyes. There was no greed or thirst, not even any emotion. It was like the branches of trees swaying gently in the wind, or the lake water rippling gently in the wind. Because it was natural, it was calm, and it was this calmness that made people easily feel fear. This pair of eyes was no longer black and white, but it was also not as perfectly balanced and perfect gray as before. The black pupils were still darker in color, becoming darker and smaller. Mixed with calm emotions, it looked like a demon from the underworld peeking out from the abyss, quietly watching the world. At this moment, the half-man Taoist suddenly thought of what he had previously described to Longqing about the true face of Haotian he had seen during the Tianqi. He vaguely understood something and suddenly felt infinite fear. After Longqing had used the gray eye to absorb too much of his aura, the old Taoist's body had shrunk. His face was the same, but the distance between his eyes was much wider. He looked like a mentally disabled person who was in a daze under a tree. He looked at Longqing's emotionless, calm and terrifying eyes, and murmured with a trembling voice, "Why is this happening? How could Haotian allow you to go beyond the limit?" Longqing looked at him calmly and said, "You said that to erase Haotian's will, one needs no faith, no rules, so how can there be a limit? But in fact you are still wrong. No one in this world can really ignore the rules because the rules belong to Haotian's divine realm. That was why Kuhaoran was killed by the heavens. So to really ignore the rules, one should not erase Haotian's will, but use one's own mind to understand Haotian's will, or even completely transform into Haotian's will." The half-man Taoist's body kept trembling, and blood kept gushing out from his waist. His voice was shrill and terrified as he roared, "Even so, how could Haotian choose a useless person like you? How can mortals like us guess Haotian's will?" Longqing looked at him and said emotionlessly, "We only need to accept and praise it. Just a moment ago I wanted more of you, even all of you. And Haotian felt my wish, so you must give all of yourself to me." The half-man Taoist said mournfully, "I don't want to." Longqing said, "You can't stop me, because I have received Haotian's decree. But I will die." The half-man Taoist roared, cried and begged. Longqing said, "For decades your life has been worse than death. Today you can die in my hands and you can be free. Give yourself to me before you die, and you will die a worthy death." The half-man Taoist's body had shrunk a lot, and he looked like a child of a few years old. But this was not rejuvenation, and the wrinkles on his face were deeper than before. He knew that he was going to die soon. He knew that he could not escape from this swamp. He even vaguely guessed that this was really Haotian's decree, but he was still unwilling to die. He screamed in pain and stretched out his moving hand, wanting to tear Longqing's mouth and dig out his eyes. But strangely, his hand on Longqing's chest was still the same, and his moving hand had shrunk a lot. It could not reach Longqing at all, and could only tremble and wave in the air in vain. He looked like a child whose candy had been taken away, extremely miserable and desperate. "This is really Haotian's decree." Longqing looked at him and comforted him. "Otherwise, why would you be so stupid to be willing to pass half of your power to me, knowing that I am a cruel and cold person, knowing that I want to plot against you and take all your power, so you can die in peace?" The half-man Taoist's arm, which was waving in the air, became stiff. After a moment, he retracted his hand tiredly. He lowered his head in pain and panted heavily. He said, "Yes, I know you are a bad fellow. Why did I give you a chance to plot against me? Perhaps I really don't want to live anymore. I just want to find an heir to help me fulfill my wish." He raised his head. His head had shrunk a lot, and his eyes were much bigger. and they were about to move to the cheeks on both sides of his face. He looked particularly strange and terrifying. But at this time, the expression in his eyes was no longer resentful, angry, or fearful. There was only a bright light left, which was the relief after understanding. He looked at Long Qing and panted excitedly. He said, "Kill everyone in the academy for me, and then let the billions of Haotian believers in the world remember my name. My surname is He, and my name is. I will kill everyone in the academy, and I will destroy the Tang Empire." Without waiting for him to finish, Long Qing said calmly, "But who you are has little to do with me. You have given me too much humiliation and pain these days, so this is your punishment." The half-man Taoist was slightly startled, and then he laughed out loud. However, his cultivation base was about to dissipate, and his laughter sounded particularly hoarse and powerless. "You are indeed a ruthless and heartless fellow. Forget it, no matter where you go in the future, it is still my cultivation base that will allow you to be reborn. Whether my name is left behind or not, when you roam the world, you will spread my glory." Long Qing smiled and said, "Exactly." The half-man Taoist did not speak anymore, and calmly waited for death. But the next moment he suddenly narrowed his horrifying, deformed eyes and looked at Long Qing. He said, "Death is coming soon. I don't know if I will fall into the underworld or return to the divine light of Haotian. But I want to tell you that I am still afraid of death, because the end is every life's irrepressible sorrow." Long Qing listened quietly, knowing that the old Taoist's last words must have a deep meaning. "I will be afraid of death. They are the same as me," the half-man Taoist said. Long Qing knew that he was referring to the other old Taoist priests in the mountain cave. The half-man Taoist raised his head with difficulty and looked at everything in the deep cave. He looked at the dozens of strong breaths and said mockingly, "They are watching you suck me dry, and they are feeling my fear of death. So they will definitely not be like me and pass on all their cultivation to you. But just as I cannot resist the temptation of you, they cannot resist the temptation of you. So if they want to live, they cannot allow you to continue living. Unless you leave, they will definitely kill you." Long Qing said after a moment of silence, "Although it is a little regretful, I understand." The half-man Taoist looked at him quietly and said lovingly, "Then run." After saying this, he closed his eyes and fell on the snow-white bed. He died. The dozens of strong breaths in the cave suddenly surged and seemed extremely terrifying. In an instant they crushed all the luminous pearls on the stone wall and attacked Long Qing's body. Long Qing screamed and his face became snow-white. His knees bounced off the ground and his body was like a leaf. He passed through the only passage among the dozens of breaths and floated out of the cave. He escaped the cave. Without thinking, he directly jumped off the cliff and ran towards the Jishou Abbey in the distance. The dozens of strong breaths, with fear of the unknown, with violent breaths, with angry flames, and with unimaginably powerful states, spewed out from the countless holes in the cliff. The green vines covering the surface of the mountain suddenly shattered and shot towards the sky and the earth like sharp arrows. The earth trembled uneasily, and the whole world seemed to be destroyed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 519. The vines on the cliff were very strong, but they seemed so fragile under the tearing of the dozens of terrifying auras. They broke into countless pieces and shot toward the dense forest. The vines were very strong, but it did not mean that they were heavy. In fact, they were very light. But when they were on the mountain path and in the forest, they were like heavy siege stones. Accompanied by a loud rumbling sound, the green vines smashed into the ground, creating countless holes. They flew into the forest, smashing countless trees and splashing countless debris. The debris whistled through the air, some deeply embedded into solid tree trunks, and some left deep white marks on the surface of hard rocks. It was an extremely terrifying scene. A piece of vine that looked very thin and soft fell from the cliff and hit Long Qing in the back. He felt that his back had been hit by a huge stone. His face suddenly turned pale and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. His eyes showed extreme fear, But he forced himself to endure the injury and continued to run down the mountain. The old Taoist priests in the cave had mixed feelings about Long Qing. He represented the hope of the world, but he also represented the shadow of death. When the two were mixed together, it became the darkest and sweetest temptation. They had silently watched the half-man Taoist pass on his power and vaguely understood something. They understood that even if Long Qing was not as vicious as before, he could not control the irrepressible ambition and greed in the process of using the gray eye. And that absolutely cold ambition and greed would ultimately represent their death. The Taoist priests who had been injured by the headmaster and Ku Haoren had lingered on this mountain for decades and still did not die. This meant that they did not want to die. If they did not want to die, they had to be able to resist the dark and sweet temptation that Long Qing brought to them. The simplest way was to kill him. Long Qing did not understand this from the beginning. But before the half-man Taoist died, he had warned him, so he reacted immediately and tried to escape. However, even though he knew how terrifying the old Taoist priests in the cave were, he still did not expect that just a few simple breaths could cause such an earth-shattering power. Rocks flew on the mountain path and rumbled continuously. In the dense forest, trees fell and branches were destroyed, creating countless smoke and dust. It looked like Haotian was angry and had sent a meteor shower to punish disrespectful sinners. With a pale face, Long Qing ran wildly in the smoke and dangerous explosions, desperately avoiding the green vines and fallen trees that could easily kill him. Fortunately for him, he had to climb this cliff every day since he left the South Sea and came to the Jisho Abbey to deliver things to the old Taoist priests in the cave. Therefore, he was very familiar with the terrain of the cliff and the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. This familiarity helped him make the fastest and most accurate response. From time to time, debris cut his skin and flesh. More and more wounds appeared on his body, and more blood flowed out. His black Taoist robe did not change color, but the edges of his robe were already wet and began to drip. Gradually, the explosions in the dense forest became more and more sparse, and there were fewer and fewer pieces of green vines falling down. He was getting further and further away from the mountain peak. He did not slow down his running speed, and the expression on his face became calmer and calmer. In the deepest part of his calm expression, perhaps there was still fear and ecstasy, but no one could see it, even if it was himself. Long Qing finally succeeded in leaving the cliff and running into the Jisho Abbey. He came to the lake and looked at the golden and jade-like grass on the eaves of the 7 thatched huts. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly let out a low roar like a wounded beast. He rushed into the 3rd hut and reached out to hold the Sha Handscroll of the Tomes of Arcane. The Sha Handscroll of the Tomes of Arcane recorded countless secret skills. It was as vast as the sea and extremely thick. However, for some reason, when his blood-stained right hand fell on the Sha Handscroll, the Tomes of Arcane seemed to become much thinner. Long Qing put the Sha Handscroll into his arms, walked out of the hut, and looked at the other huts. However, just as he was about to continue doing something, he suddenly felt a very faint aura coming towards the lake at an extremely fast speed. His expression suddenly froze, and he did not dare to delay any longer. He ran towards the Taoist temple in the distance. That Taoist temple was the medicine hall of the Jisho Abbey. These days, Long Qing had been refining medicine and cultivating in the medicine hall, so he was very familiar with the place. He ran directly to the alchemy room at the back of the medicine hall, and took out the earth-sitting elixir that had been simmering in the tripod. Although he had forcibly absorbed the half-man Taoist cultivation, one could imagine how majestic the experience, consciousness, and psyche power of a powerhouse in the Tianqi state who had surpassed the 5 states was. With his current state, there was no way for him to absorb it in a short period of time. He even had to use an extremely strong willpower to suppress the restlessness of the cultivation in his body. And when he escaped from the cave, he had been seriously injured. Logically speaking, he should not hesitate to swallow the earth-sitting elixir that he had painstakingly refined, and then sit on the ground to circulate the medicinal power to ensure his survival. However, the strange thing was that he did not even look at the elixirs. Instead, he ran directly to the front hall. He pushed open the sandalwood door and walked to the simple display shelf. On the display shelf, there was a small crystal-clear medicine bottle made of unknown materials. In order to resist the temptation, he did not open the sandalwood door these days. He did not even look behind the door. However, in his heart, he did not know how many times he had imagined holding this small medicine bottle. He did not know how many times he had imagined how it would feel to hold this small medicine bottle in his arms. So he remembered the position of the small medicine bottle very clearly. He did not hesitate when he reached out, and his movements were very accurate. He was almost emotionless, and his state of mind was so dark and terrifying that even the old Taoist priests in the cave were faintly afraid of him. The moment his fingers touched the small medicine bottle, he could not help but tremble. His fingers were stained with blood, and there was an extremely strong smell of blood. The small medicine bottle gave off a faint medicinal fragrance. When this extremely faint medicinal fragrance lingered on his fingers, all the smell of blood seemed to be instantly purified and could no longer be smelled. Long Qing even felt that the serious injuries in his body seemed to disappear in an instant. He could no longer maintain his calm, and his gray eyes suddenly brightened. When Long Qing walked out of the medicine hall and prepared to use the fastest speed to find a way to leave the Jishou Abbey, he was surprised to see the figure of the middle-aged Taoist in front of the meadow. The meadow in early autumn strangely did not turn yellow, nor was there any frost. It was still green. The middle-aged Taoist was wearing a light green Taoist robe. He stood in front of the meadow as if he wanted to blend in, and looked extremely inconspicuous. This scene meant some other information to Long Qing. He had never known what level of cultivation this uncle master had reached. At this moment, looking at him faintly blending in with the meadow, he finally confirmed that this uncle master had long entered the knowing destiny state, and might even have reached the peak of the knowing destiny state. A bitter smile appeared on Long Qing's face. No matter how lonely the Jishou Abbey was, it was still the holy land of Haotian Taoism. It was still the unknown place that was respected by the cultivators in the world. How could a Taoist who was qualified to manage this Taoist abbey be an ordinary person? The middle-aged Taoist looked at him quietly and said, "Why did you do this?" Long Qing knew what he was asking and answered, "Because I wanted to do this." On the boat in the South Sea, the Taoist in indigo had a very important conversation with Long Qing. It was from that moment that Long Qing understood that his thoughts were the will of Haotian. The middle-aged Taoist had been meditating in the Jishou Abbey all year round, and he was the senior brother of the Taoist in indigo on the boat in the South Sea. Naturally, he understood the meaning of Long Qing's answer. He looked at Long Qing and said, "As a junior brother, I may not necessarily agree with senior brother's view, but I can't find a reason to oppose him. However, even if our thoughts are the will of Haotian, I still don't understand why you are doing this. You can cultivate in the Jishou Abbey, read the tomes of arcane, and spend time with the seniors of Haotian Taoism. Even if you do nothing and cultivate peacefully, one day you will regain your original strength, and even achieve a better state. Why do you want to take such a risk?" "Because I am not the only one cultivating in the world," Long Qing answered. He did not finish his sentence. He was very clear that when he was meditating in the Jishou Abbey, those people did not stop moving forward. The Tao addict had become the great divine priest of judgment, the calligraphy addict had entered the knowing destiny state, and the most important thing was that the person named Ning Ke would not wait for him. He needed time. He could not cultivate peacefully in this Taoist abbey for decades, because although his expression and mood seemed to be calm, he could not achieve true peace. Before defeating the Tao addict and killing Ning Quebec, the middle-aged Taoist suddenly smelled a very faint medicinal fragrance, and his expression gradually became serious. He said, "Murdering the seniors of Haotian Taoism is already a great sin, and you actually want to steal the treasure of Haotian Taoism?" Long Qing knew that uncle had already found out that he had stolen the small medicine bottle. When he was about to say something, the middle-aged Taoist suddenly felt the aura of the tomes of arcane on him. He could not help but change his expression and sternly reprimanded, "How dare you steal the tomes of arcane? Aren't you afraid of being thrown into the underworld?" "I have been thinking. When I was really desperate, no longer giving up on myself, no longer swaying between light and darkness, and began to be an ordinary businessman, trying to live a vulgar and boring life like a mortal, Why did the Abbey Dean come to save me? When I came to the Jisho Abbey and began to cultivate the gray eye, I saw the heavenly power pill, and gradually could not suppress the temptation of the aura of the seniors of Hautian Taoism in the cave. Especially when the half-man Taoist told me about the relationship between power and pride before he died. I gradually understood that if the Abbey Dean could find something special about me, it would be that I have no attachment to this world. So I can be proud of everything in this world, and I can also be proud of nothing. I can abandon everything, and so I have the best chance to become the most powerful person. Longqing looked at the middle-aged Taoist and said quietly. There was a very strange but extraordinarily firm smile on his pale face. As long as I can become powerful again, so what if I have to sink in the underworld forever? If I am willing to pay the price of sinking in the underworld forever, why can't I become powerful again? Wow, the feeling of updating is so good. There is more today. Take your time to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 520. The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly. He knew very well why his senior brother had sent Longqing back to the Jisho Abbey. Longqing was not wrong, but he knew that even his senior brother would not have thought that Longqing would be so bold and vicious. He would not have thought that Longqing would dare to do so many treacherous things. If this is a path that my senior brother has drawn for you, then you have now gone straight to the end of this path and come to the cliff. If this is the life that my senior brother has arranged for you, then you have now deviated from his arrangements and exceeded the limits that everyone can tolerate. The middle-aged Taoist said slowly. The green meadow behind him reflected the sunlight. Behind the meadow was a steep precipice. No one knew how deep the precipice was or how deep the abyss under the clouds was. In the cave, when I was absorbing the consciousness of the half-man Taoist, I was very intoxicated. That intoxication was mixed with fear. Just as I said, there are no rules or limits that can restrain me. The Abbey Dean's arrangements may not be correct, because as long as there are arrangements, there will be certain rules. Longqing looked at the light green Taoist robe on the middle-aged Taoist and thought of the green Taoist robe on the South Sea boat that the Abbey Dean wore. A trace of fear appeared on his face. However, after a moment, the fear turned into relief. The Abbey Dean probably cannot imagine what will happen to me, because other than ourselves even we do not know our own thoughts. How can we understand what Hautian's will is? The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, even my senior brother and the great divine priest of revelation do not dare to assume that they understand Hautian's will. Who in this world can truly understand what firmament is thinking? What right do you have to say that you bear Hautian's orders and blame your sins on Hautian? Longqing said, the sins in the eyes of mortals may not exist in the mind of Hautian. Maybe you're right. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said, but now that I am standing in front of you, I really want to know what belief supports you not to kneel down and beg for mercy out of fear. Instead, you talk to me with confidence. Do you really think that I will let you leave with the tomes of arcane and the sacred medicine with such words? Longqing said calmly, if my thoughts are really Hautian's will, then I will fulfill Hautian's orders. How can Hautian let me die? If I die in your hands today, it proves that my thoughts are not Hautian's will. In that case, I will lose my last hope, and there is no point in continuing to live. So, uncle, I am really not afraid of death, at least not now. The middle-aged Taoist said, you still have a point, but to me words are as meaningless as to you. Hand over the heavenly book and the sacred medicine, and at least I won't kill you now. Of course you won't kill me, because at least the Abbey Dean once placed some hope on me. Longqing glanced at his Taoist robe and felt the tomes of arcane and the small bottle in his arms. He said, there are no rules and no bottom line, so there is no deal. I have lost a lot in the past, so I am as greedy as a child now. How can I bear to hand over the candy that I have in my hands? Then he raised his head, looked at the middle-aged Taoist and said, uncle, have you ever seen those poor children fighting for candy? I didn't have the chance to see it when I was in the Imperial Palace or in the West Hill Divine Palace, but I saw it when I was a beggar. It was more lively and sad than beggars fighting for leftovers. Even if the children were full, even if the sweets were so cheap, even if the sweets were useless to them, they still had to eat desperately, because if they didn't eat, they might be eaten by other children. The middle-aged Taoist was shocked and hurriedly said, "No." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves. A vast and pure aura suddenly rolled up countless amounts of qi of heaven and earth, turning into invisible ropes that were about to bind Longqing's body. However, Longqing already had a plan in mind. As he spoke, he had already silently crushed the small bottle in his arms. Before the middle-aged Taoist's aura could reach him, he stuffed the broken pieces of the bottle into his mouth. With a strange smile, he chewed hard. He really looked like a poor child who was desperately stuffing candy into his mouth. The broken pieces of the small bottle were very sharp. They cut open Longqing's mouth, and some blood flowed down from the corner of his lips. More blood, mixed with the heavenly power pill in the broken pieces, entered his stomach. The middle-aged Taoist moved like a willow in the wind and came before Longqing in an instant. However, Longqing had already taken the medicine. Even if he cut open his stomach, the heavenly power pill would not be able to regenerate. The middle-aged Taoist's expression was unusually cold. The anger in his eyes seemed to be about to spit out and burn Longqing to ashes. The heavenly power pill could be said to be the most precious medicine in the world. Even the Jishou Abbey only had a few of them. After Chan Pippi left the Jishou Abbey, there was only one left. Longqing raised his pale face and looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a smile. He said, "Uncle, I've eaten the only heavenly power pill. If you kill me like this, at least this heavenly power pill will be like a candy dropped into a cesspool. If you let me live, you can at least look forward to the changes this heavenly power pill will bring to me. I think for Haotian Taoism this is the right choice." The middle-aged Taoist narrowed his eyes. No one could tell what he was thinking. Stealing the medicine of Haotian Taoism was, of course, an unforgivable crime. However, from another perspective, once the medicine was taken, its preciousness would be transferred to the person who took it. No matter how angry he was, the medicine would no longer exist. Now, only the person who took the medicine was left. This was like the person who had the jade was guilty. However, if the jade merged with the person would become the jade. Not only would he not be guilty, but he would also be precious. From the moment he saw the middle-aged Taoist, Longqing did not think that he could escape from the Jishou Abbey with his own strength. Not to mention that he was heavily injured. Even if he digested the terrifying cultivation of the half-man Taoist that he had swallowed, he would not be able to defeat this unfathomable uncle. From that moment on, he had decided on this strategy. Whether it was the words that were filled with resentment or the words about the will of Haotian, they were all a cover. What he wanted to do was to take the heavenly power pill when the middle-aged Taoist was not paying attention. Longqing had succeeded. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist who seemed to be deep in thought and smiled. He was not very proud, but was very satisfied with his calculation of the interests of Haotian Taoism and the hearts of people. The heavenly power pill gradually melted in his stomach and turned into a spring stream of fresh medicinal power. It slowly flowed through his body and repaired his severely damaged organs. It even began to nourish the snow mountain and ocean of qi that had been somewhat dried up after being rebuilt in the South Sea. Longqing could clearly feel all this. He even faintly guessed that when the medicinal power of the heavenly power pill completely melted into his body, his snow mountain and ocean of qi would be completely restored. At that time, in addition to the lifetime cultivation of the half-man Taoist that he had swallowed, his state would be able to return to its previous peak state. It was even possible that he could directly cross the threshold and enter the realm of knowing destiny. He had once lost everything, and only then would he know how difficult it was to regain it. He had once been glorious, and only then would he know how difficult it was to climb back to the peak. He recalled the arrow on the snow cliff in the wilderness, the bloody hole in his chest, the desperate journey into the night, and the steamed bun in the ruined temple in the capital of the Yen kingdom. Longqing's eyes became slightly moist. Then he felt his body become a little lighter, as if he was about to float. Then he realized that this was not an illusion, nor was it an illusion. It was the medicinal power flowing through his body, constantly washing away all the dirt and filth, washing away all the dust and mortals that originally belonged to the world from his bones. He became light, so light that he was about to float into the distance. It was a feeling that seemed illusory and real. It was a side effect of the peerless medicinal power of the heavenly power pill, gradually transforming into the aura of a cultivator. The smell released by the medicine seemed to become some kind of real gas that slowly seeped out of his pores and slowly enveloped his entire body. Longqing did not forget those regrets in his intoxication. Although he had used a seemingly simple but actually unbreakable deduction to avoid the danger of death, he knew that he would probably be imprisoned in the Jishou Abbey, and would wait for the Abbey Dean to return to make a decision. He would naturally not be able to keep the tomes of arcane in his arms. However, what happened next was not what he had expected. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said indifferently, "I admire your reaction speed and countermeasures. But you seem to have forgotten that you can ignore the rules as crazy as you are. But Haotian Taoism and our Taoist abbey still have their own rules." Longqing frowned slightly and wanted to say something. However, the middle-aged Taoist did not say anything else. He casually slapped his palm toward the top of his head. The palm looked so simple. It did not have the power of a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. However, it contained a mysterious aura. It was as if it was in harmony with the laws of heaven and earth. There was no way to avoid it. Longqing could not avoid this palm. No matter how miraculous his encounters were, he still could not avoid the palm of a powerhouse at the peak of knowing destiny state. The huge gap between their states was like the will of Haotian, unstoppable. Looking at the palm that was getting closer and closer, Longqing's face revealed an expression of despair and unwillingness. The middle-aged Taoist's palm landed heavily on Longqing's forehead. However, unexpectedly, Longqing's head did not fall like a ripe fruit, nor did it burst like a ripe watermelon. It was still intact. The middle-aged Taoist raised his eyebrows, as if he had sensed something very unbelievable. Before the palm that contained the truth of heaven and earth touched Longqing's head, it first met the aura that burst out from the heavenly power pill in his body. An extremely dull sound burst out in front of the meadow. "Writing is very tiring. I'm writing the 3rd chapter anyway. I really don't know when I'll update it. Anyway, I'll sleep after I finish writing and touch everyone." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 521. In Longqing's mind, there was nothing wrong with his decisiveness and response. He had completely mastered human nature. It was not a weakness but a trait. However, he had forgotten an important point. The common trait of human nature must have appeared many times in history. In other words, his decisiveness and response seemed wise, but in fact, he was just copying the wisdom of his predecessors. He was still walking the same old path. Until now, Longqing still did not know the middle-aged Taoist's name and surname. However, after the Taoist in indigo was chased to the South Sea by the headmaster of the academy with a wooden stick, he had enough wisdom and insight to temporarily manage the Jishou Abbey. To him, Longqing's response was filled with a stale and disgusting aura, which was increasingly unacceptable to him. If he could not accept it, then he would have to suppress him forcefully. Without hesitation, he slapped Longqing's head, ignoring the precious heavenly power pill that had been swallowed. He did not care what Longqing meant to Haotian Taoism. He only wanted to protect the rules and bottom line of Haotian Taoism. However, to everyone's regret, to the world's regret, and to Ningke's regret in the future, the middle-aged Taoist palm did not manage to kill Longqing. Instead, it was strangely bounced back by the faint yet extremely tough aura that enveloped Longqing. Longqing, who was close to madness, was no longer bound by any moral rules. That was why he could do so many rebellious things. However, there were rules in Haotian's world. To a large extent, he had to thank these rules for being able to survive, such as the forces of action and reaction. The middle-aged Taoist's casual but irresistible palm landed on Longqing's head, causing his teeth to clench and his facial features to tremble. However, it did not break through the thin aura. The huge and terrifying power was bounced back by the aura film, causing his palm to bounce up high. With a bang, Longqing's feet left a deep pit on the hard meadow ground. The pants on his legs were torn into pieces and flew away. He felt a sharp pain in his leg bones, as if they were broken. Smoke and dust filled the air. Longqing, who had been hit by the palm, was like a rubber ball that had been slapped hard on the ground. He suddenly paused and then bounced up into the sky at a terrifying speed. There was a whistling sound of wind breaking. Longqing bounced into the sky high and far. He was confused and did not know what to do. He felt the autumn wind blowing on his face and looked at the clouds that were getting closer and closer. He thought of the light feeling he had after taking the heavenly power pill. He could not help but wonder if he would really become an immortal and leave this terrible human world. A single heaven ascension pill couldn't really make a mortal become an immortal. As long as one did not become a deity, no matter how high one flew, there would always be a moment when one would fall back down. Longqing was shaken off the ground and floated up. He didn't know whether he had flown hundreds of feet or thousands of feet. Just when he felt that he could touch the blue sky and the flowing clouds, he began to fall. Apart from the sages who could return to Haotian's divine kingdom, most people's final destination was the earth. The attraction of the earth to humans was so strong that it carried a lot of power. The power made Longqing fall faster and faster. He left the clouds and broke through the autumn wind. He watched as the middle-aged Taoist crossed the meadow and fell into the precipice behind the meadow. He disturbed the clouds that had not dissipated for years and went straight into the bottomless abyss. Falling from such a high place, even a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state would be shaken into a pile of flesh and blood. Moreover, no one knew what kind of dangers there were in the abyss. Longqing fell into the abyss with the tomes of arcane. The middle-aged Taoist walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the clouds flowing like a lake disturbed by stones. He was silent and no one knew what he was thinking. No one knew whether Longqing was alive or dead. He might be alive, but he should be dead. But who knew? The middle-aged Taoist looked at the human-shaped hole that was gradually swallowed by the flowing clouds. He thought silently, if you are still alive, then maybe you really are the legendary man of heaven's mandate. In the green mountain behind the Jisho Abbey, muffled or shrill sounds could be heard from time to time. The green vines scattered on the mountain path and in the dense forest trembled with these sounds, as if they were extremely afraid. These sounds came from the terrifying Taoist priests who had been hiding in the cave for decades. These Taoist priests did not deliberately show their power. They just felt something in their hearts and talked casually, but it made the green vines and red soil tremble uneasily. Dozens of caves shook and almost collapsed. Why? Why do I see hope, but it is such a cold hope? I want to kill that Junior. That piece of trash sure has guts. How dare he have evil thoughts about us? Why didn't Taoist he do anything before he died? What did he see? The will of Haotian or the shadow of Yama? Is this the real man of heaven? The cliff that was still tightly wrapped by the vines suddenly became quiet. No one spoke for a long time. The old Taoist priests in the cave thought of the scene they saw earlier. They thought of the truth they had vaguely understood. For a moment they all fell silent at the same time. After a long time, an extremely deep voice sounded between the cliffs. The birds that were trying to find nesting materials in the dense forest at the foot of the mountain heard this voice and immediately scattered in all directions in fear. Whether it is the will of Haotian or the shadow of Yama, regardless of whether it is the decree of heaven or the original sin of mankind, the appearance of this young Haotian Taoism disciple in front of us has already explained many things. Senior brother He's cultivation was taken by that young man, but he did not kill him before he died. This means that he did not want to resist this temptation. An old and resentful voice came from one of the caves. If it were me, as long as Longqing could inherit all my achievements and then destroy the academy and the Tang Empire, maybe I would be willing. I have had enough of living in seclusion for decades. If it were not for that lunatic Ku Haoran's sword, I would be sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade now. Lotus would not have taken my position, and I would not be able to see the world and people for the rest of my life. An extremely cold voice came from another cave. If you are really willing to pass your achievements to that young man, then why did you kill him before? In the end, you are still reluctant to give up the opportunity to escape. Don't talk about the past and then talk about reluctance. We old guys who are trapped in the cave have all shed blood and tears. When the headmaster of the academy went to the peach mountain to cut the peach blossoms, if I was not in front of him and was seen as seriously injured, Wei Guangming would not dare to expel me from the peach mountain because of those groundless accusations. The old voice said mockingly, as the elder of West Hill and the senior brother of the great divine priest of Revelation, you actually had fun with the wife of an ordinary believer in the kingdom of song. If it were not for the fact that you were seriously injured by the headmaster of the academy, do you think that Wei Guangming would just expel you from the peach mountain? What are you trying to say? I want to say that you can totally pass your cultivation to that useless Long Qing. Why don't you? Because I will have to go out one day. Even if the mountain collapses and the sea dries up, you will not be able to go out. Stop arguing. That extremely thick voice filled with boundless might exploded between the cliffs, causing the green vines to rustle and the birds that were about to fly to fall to the ground with mournful cries. It was obvious that the old Taoist priests in the cave were very afraid of this voice. Senior brother, he was cut in half by Ku Haoran and lived a life worse than death for decades. Unlike us, we can still see the light of day one day. It is not necessarily a bad thing to have such a vicious successor. But we are different. Although our old injuries are serious, it is not to the extent that we cannot suppress our realms. As long as there is a chance, we can leave these caves and the Jishou Abbey. Whether that vicious young man, who even I am afraid of, is dead or alive, he is far away from us. What we need to do now is to meditate and wait in silence. Any memory of the glory of the past is a poison in the heart. Even without that young disciple, you will still be possessed by the devil. There was dead silence among the cliffs. No one dared to object because the old Taoist priests in the cave knew very well that no one was more qualified to recall the past than that person. If he had not been defeated by Ku Haoran's sword, the owner of the deep voice would definitely be sitting at the top of the West Hill Divine Palace and leading the entire Haotian Taoism as the hierarch. After an unknown amount of time, the voice came from the cliff again. The green vines did not move, but the red soil that seemed to be stained with blood began to rustle because of the despair and hatred in the voice. Will we really be able to leave these caves alive? Can we really see the light of day again? How long do we have to wait? We've already waited for decades. Some people have already died of old age. Don't tell me we'd rather continue waiting? These questions, filled with resentment, despair, and unwillingness, were like the cold rain in late autumn, constantly washing the cliff outside the cave, bringing endless pain to the people inside the cave. After a long time, that deep and resounding voice rang out again. It was filled with frustration, determination, hope for the future, and resentment towards a certain person. It said in a deep voice, wait, wait forever, prepare, always be prepared, wait, prepare for that old bastard to die. This is the only thing we can do. Decades ago, the devil's doctrine was at its peak. Correspondingly, there were many powerhouses in Haotian Taoism. If the West Hill Divine Palace were to go all out, it seemed that they could sweep the world. Then there was a youngest uncle from the academy. That youngest uncle's name was Ku Haoran. He rode a little black donkey and wore an inconspicuous sword at his waist. He first destroyed the devil's doctrine, and then, for one reason or another, or perhaps because of a different ideology, he began to fight against the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. In the midst of the bloodshed, no one knew how many amazing cultivation geniuses of Haotian Taoism were killed by Ku Haoran's sword, or seriously injured by him, or forced to break the realm and be punished by heaven. Since then they did not dare to come out. One day the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism gathered and surrounded Ku Haoran. Ku Haoran won the battle. Then he was punished by heaven and died. After that, the headmaster entered West Hill and climbed the Peach Mountain. He killed all the peach blossoms, killed those who participated in the battle, and seriously injured the rest. The Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey and the Taoist in indigo welcomed him. The headmaster hit him with his cudgel. The Taoist in indigo was defeated and fled to the South Sea. From then on, he never set foot on land. Decades later, there was a green mountain behind the Jishou Abbey, and the caves in the cliff were like ant nests. There were countless powerhouses with terrifying states but were seriously injured. Half of them were killed by Ku Haoran, and the other half by the headmaster. If these powerhouses of Haotian Taoism reappeared in the world, no one knew how terrible the storm would be. However, they could not come out, and the world had even forgotten about their existence. Because the headmaster did not allow it. The headmaster is so awesome. I feel like I'm pretty awesome too. I actually wrote it. Actually, to be precise, I should say that my father's power is awesome. Good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 522. When Longqing woke up, he was greeted by a thick miasma fog, a thick layer of rotten leaves on the ground, and endless pain in his body. He had actually survived after falling from such a high cliff. Even he himself could not find any reasonable answer. Perhaps the faintly discernible ancient trees above the miasma had reduced the force of his fall, or perhaps the thick, soft bed of rotten leaves and sludge had played an effect. Longqing felt that it was Haotian's will that allowed him to survive. Just as he had mentioned in the conversation with his uncle in the Jisho Abbey, if he was really the legendary person of the Heaven's Mandate and carried the most obscure will of Haotian, then Haotian would not have let him die so easily. He really did not die. This fact gave him infinite confidence, but also a lot of confusion and fear, because he did not know what to do next in his life. Although the mud and rotten leaves were soft, many of Longqing's bones were still broken. However, the real pain was not the physical injuries, but the two powerful auras that were constantly clashing in his body. When he was unconscious, the aura of the half-man Taoist in the Tianqi state was no longer bound by his will. It roared out from his sense of perception and from all parts of his body, turning into countless sharp steel knives that kept scraping his bones, cutting his muscles, and even trying to blast his snow mountain and ocean of qi into ruins. At the same time, the heavenly power pill contained the aura of the spirit herbs, which continuously healed the cracks in his bones and the broken meridians in his muscles, nourishing his life force and repairing his ocean of qi and mountain of snow over and over again from the ruins, relying on the last remaining shadow. This was a process of continuous destruction and repair, and it was extremely painful. It did not matter when he was unconscious, but now that he had woken up, the pain became the most real existence. Longqing's face instantly turned snow-white, and an extremely miserable scream burst out from his bleeding teeth, spreading far and wide in the quiet forest at the bottom of the valley. Because the pain was so intense, Longqing almost fainted again as soon as he woke up, but he knew how important it was for him to be awake at this time. If he fainted in the dense forest at the bottom of the valley full of poison and unknown dangers, he would not be able to hold on for long. At that time, no matter how merciful Haotian was, he would have to abandon him. With another miserable howl, Longqing slammed into a stone not far away from him, breaking one of his ribs. He used the fresh pain to suppress the rest of the pain. Before he passed out, he fought for a moment to gather his spirit and mind. He sat cross-legged in the lotus position and began to meditate to heal himself. Time passed slowly. Longqing's face was pale, and the blood on his Taoist robe had long solidified. He sat on the rotten leaves and mud, maintaining the same posture. His chest did not rise or fall, as if he was no longer breathing. He looked like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. However, the two auras were still fighting in his body. The medicinal power of the heavenly power pill and the half-man Taoist aura of the Tianqi state had completely cleaned up his body and original aura, turning him into an empty barrel. The extremely poisonous miasma around him kept pouring into his body, changing it to the smallest extent possible. After an unknown amount of time, the sky in the dense forest at the bottom of the valley was still dark. Longqing's body trembled slightly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Inconceivably, this mouthful of blood was black in color. It was unknown whether it was because of the poisonous miasma or something else, but the blood in Longqing's body had turned black. It looked like ink, but also like the rotten water in a swamp. Many days ago, a black peach blossom had grown on the side of the boat in the South Sea. Long Qing had plucked the black peach blossom and wore it on his chest. He had never taken it off since. In the process of escaping from the cave in the Jishou Abbey, the black peach blossom on his chest had been stained with a lot of blood. The red and black color was exceptionally beautiful and eerie. At this moment it had been stained by the black blood again, and suddenly there was a faint black light. Then the light quickly faded, leaving only a pure black that was as cold as the night. Long Qing, who was sitting on the rotten leaves, seemed to have turned into a black peach blossom. The surface temperature of his body gradually became colder, and he gradually blended into the surrounding environment, as if he had become a part of the miasma and a pile of rotten leaves. Colorful poisonous snakes slithered through the rotten leaves and circled around Long Qing's body a few times. They did not seem to notice anything strange, and then they slithered away. There was also a mountain monkey with a face like that of a ghost. It screamed and swam in the forest, squatting beside Long Qing's body. It acted coquettishly, calling for its partner, and then left in boredom. Withered leaves fell. The wind blew and the withered leaves flew again. Long Qing was still sitting, unaware, and blended into the surroundings. At this moment, even if a cultivator carefully perceived him, they could not separate him. And this was the most obvious sign that he had entered the knowing destiny state. He did not know how much time had passed. Long Qing opened his eyes and woke up. There was no longer the joy of surviving a disaster in his eyes, nor was there any confusion about the unknown future, nor was there any pain. There was only calmness and indifference. The calmness towards the world and himself was absolute indifference. He stood up. The black peach blossom on his chest became even darker and more alluring. At this moment, a peach blossom formed by pure aura bloomed behind Long Qing. That was his natal peach blossom. It had also turned black. At the moment when this black natal peach blossom bloomed, the dense fog in the dense forest was shrouded by an aura of quietus. The colorful poisonous snake that was resting under the rotten leaves stiffened and then died. The ghost-faced monkey in the distant forest screamed in horror and began to flee further away. Under the pursuit of the South Jin Kingdom army, especially with the addition of the judicial department of the Divine Hall, there were only a dozen people left. Only 5 of the cavalry commanders were still alive. These people, who had once enjoyed supreme glory in the West Hill Divine Palace, had now become sinners. They fled like dogs in the forests around the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Almost every day someone died, and almost every day someone was seriously injured and abandoned. They did not know how long they would have to flee. What made them even more desperate was that they did not know what the end of this escape was. Even if it was the end of despair, at least they knew where the end was. They were now sinners of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the world of Haotian, no country dared to take them in. The only country that had the power to take them in was the Tang Empire, which would definitely be more willing to cut off their heads. Where would the end of their escape be? How would they die? Zemo's face was thin and he looked tired. His eyes were filled with numbness. He looked at the wilderness at the foot of the mountain in the twilight. He looked at the land that belonged to the kingdom of Song. He knew that the Taoist temples there had already gotten their portraits. Even if they wanted to sneak into the people, it would be impossible. Thinking of the wish that he had made at the beginning of his escape, Zemo's face revealed an extremely painful expression. He murmured, "As long as I can survive, I am willing to dedicate my life and soul to Yama. I am not afraid of falling into depravity. However, how arrogant is this? Why would Yama care about ants like you and me? Even if you want to dedicate, how can you get close to such a great existence? If a mortal wants to get close to greatness, it usually takes a process and a guide." A cold voice sounded from the cliff. Zemo's expression suddenly changed. The dozen or so fugitives behind him picked up the weapons in their hands as fast as they could. They looked at the cliff warily and were ready to attack at any time. A young man stood at the edge of the cliff, looking in the direction of the setting sun. He wore a black Taoist robe that blocked the setting sun, so his figure looked extremely dark. The slightly cold autumn wind blew from the wilderness and went up the cliff, rolling up the corner of the black Taoist robe. From time to time a few rays of twilight would leak through. The fugitives had lived in the West Hill Divine Palace for a long time. Looking at the man at the edge of the cliff, they felt that there was some kind of illusion in front of them. It was as if they saw the shadow of Haotian. Or perhaps they saw the shadow of Yama. After days of escaping, their nerves had been stretched to the point that they were about to break. The place they chose to camp was extremely remote and secretive. However, they did not expect that they would be discovered and approached quietly. In their view, the person who could quietly appear at the edge of the cliff must be extremely powerful. If it was not a master from the Kingdom of Song, then it could only be a powerhouse from the West Hill Divine Palace. The fugitives, whose cultivation had been destroyed, did not expect to defeat a powerhouse from Haotian Taoism. The moment they heard the voice, despair occupied their bodies and minds. In the midst of despair, they forced out an extremely strong fighting spirit. Since they were going to die anyway, and today might be their last battle, then they should die a heroic death. However, no one made a move. Because the young man in a black Taoist robe at the edge of the cliff gave people a feeling that they could not challenge him. Moreover, ZMO suddenly knelt behind the young man and cried bitterly. Then, more people recognized the young man, especially the 4 former commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. They trembled and ran to the edge of the cliff, knelt down behind ZMO, and cried bitterly to the back of the young man, just like shepherds scattered in the wilderness who saw their master. Commander ZMO looked at the back of the young man with tears streaming down his face. He said in a trembling voice, "Priest, everyone said that you were dead. You are still alive. This is great." A commander with a broken arm wailed and said, "Your Excellency, Your Excellency, I knew that you would not abandon us like this. You are finally back." Longqing turned around and looked at his former subordinates. He said, "Are you willing to follow me again?" The crying at the edge of the cliff gradually stopped, and everyone kowtowed again and again. ZMO raised his head and looked at the scar on Longqing's face. He looked at the black peach blossom on his chest and thought of the rumors. He was shocked to find that the priest was not only not dead, but his cultivation state was far higher than before. However, a very cold aura seeped into the depths of ZMO's and everyone's hearts. This cold aura came from Longqing. It also came from his words. "I did die before, but I don't know whether I saw Haotian or Yama after I died. During the time when I died, I thought about many things. However, it was not until I heard ZMO's words that I suddenly realized that maybe I am not the son of heaven's mandate at all." Longqing looked at the night sky and said thoughtfully, "Maybe I am the son of Yama? I was hit in the waist by anxiety, so I don't want the monthly vote today. The foreplay is basically done, and it is about to start. Anxiety is heavy. After thinking for a long time, I decided that it is necessary to update and get more monthly votes, but I still need to pay more attention to the plot. I am working hard to write, and please supervise me. I hope that I can write the climax of the next 6 months well. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 523. For cultivators, among the 5 states of cultivation, the 2 most important passes were the initial awareness state and the knowing destiny state. The initial awareness state was the first thing ordinary people saw when they set foot on the road of cultivation. At that time, how much a cultivator could see would basically determine how far he could go in the future. The knowing destiny state, on the other hand, made it possible for a cultivator to be detached from the mortal world. Therefore, the moment cultivators crossed this threshold, they could often see the future that they could not see and sense some mysterious omens. After escaping from the Jisho Abbey and falling off the cliff, Longqing meditated in the poisonous fog at the bottom of the valley and broke into the knowing destiny state. Longqing was now a grand cultivator, and his cultivation state had long surpassed that of the past. However, he was not like those seniors recorded in the West Hill scriptures, who could sense the future the moment they entered the knowing destiny state. It was not until now, when he stood on the edge of the cliff, watching the setting sun and listening to ZMO and the others' cries, that he vaguely sensed something. The sun was about to set, and the world was about to return to darkness. What he had done could be considered as deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. His current state of mind was so cold. So all these years, was he really following the will of Haotian as the Abbey Dean said? Or was he deceiving himself and others? Had he already turned his back on the world of light and resolutely thrown himself into the long night to become the vanguard of Yama? Long Qing looked at the setting sun gradually being swallowed by the mountains, and a self-mocking smile appeared on his face. He could not confirm any of his speculations because it was a realm that he still could not reach. Listening to Long Qing's words, Zmo and the others felt cold all over. However, this coldness did not last long because they had seen too many deaths and suffered too much humiliation on their way to escape. They knew that compared with the cold eyes and autumn wind of the world, the real night was safer and even warmer. Once again they kowtowed to Long Qing to show their loyalty. Zmo knelt in front of Long Qing and said in a bleak tone, "Priest, I dare not deceive you. When we went down the Peach Mountain, our cultivation was destroyed. Now we just have more knowledge and experience than ordinary people in the world. I don't know what your purpose is this time, but I think you must want to do something big. I am worried that not only can I not help you, but I will also drag you down." Long Qing looked at him and said calmly, "What I need is your absolute loyalty. As for your cultivation being destroyed, it is not a big deal. I heard that you are now called the Fallen Knights. Please become stronger and fall with me, all the way to the bottom of the abyss." After saying this, he took out a medicine box from his bosom. Zmo sensed the pure medicinal power coming from the item in the medicine box, and could not help but tremble. His face revealed an expression of disbelief as he said in a trembling voice, "Master, this is..." He and the other Fallen Knights' cultivation was destroyed by the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, but their snow mountain and ocean of Qi were not destroyed. They were only locked by the secret method of Haotian Taoism. If they wanted to restore their cultivation, they would need at least 3 powerhouses at the level of great divine priests to force their way through, or encounter a series of miracles like Ning Quebec. Along the way, the Fallen Knights never expected to restore their cultivation, because they knew that they could not get help from 3 powerhouses at the peak of knowing destiny, and there were not many miracles in the world. Until they met their former direct superior, Prince Long Qing, at the edge of the cliff. The medicine box in Prince Long Qing's hand contained the earth-sitting pill. The earth-sitting pill was not a divine medicine of Haotian Taoism, but from the Buddhism sect. Although this kind of elixir was not like the heavenly power pill, which could heal the dead and prolong life, it had an unimaginable effect in clearing the acupoints and cleansing the heart. It was not unimaginable to reopen those locked acupoints. The Fallen Knights took the elixir from Zmo's hand with trembling hands and took it. Then they closed their eyes and sat cross-legged. The elixir was called the earth-sitting pill, which meant to become Buddha by sitting on the ground. At this moment they were sitting on the ground. They believed that even if they recovered their cultivation, they still could not become Buddha, but they could become demons. The cliff became darker and darker, gradually becoming pitch black. Long Qing, who was wearing a black Taoist robe, seemed to be one with the dark night. Looking at his subordinates who were sitting on the ground, digesting the elixir and trying to break through the snow mountain lock, his expression was very calm. He did not feel pity for using up the earth-sitting pill that he had painstakingly refined. He also did not worry about whether his subordinates would remain absolutely loyal to him after they recovered their strength. In the past few years, he was the priest of the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, the third most important person in the Black Divine Hall. Because Yi Hongyu was obsessed with cultivation, he was personally in charge of the internal affairs of the Judicial Department, especially the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who were directly under the Judicial Department. These cavalrymen were all his absolute confidants. After Yi Hongyu became the great divine priest of judgment, she punished these cavalrymen cruelly for the absurd reason of glancing at her in the crowd. Other than establishing her authority, part of the reason was that she wanted to completely erase Long Qing's influence. Because of the past, Long Qing's trust in these fallen knights was reasonable. Most importantly, the earth-sitting pill contained his painstaking efforts. When these fallen knights took the earth-sitting pill, they would become Long Qing's painstaking efforts. They would not be able to hide anything from Long Qing. As an important part of Haotian Taoism, the celestial master Taoism of Mount Longhu had always been the most staunch follower of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the relatively remote kingdom of Qi, they had many direct followers. The current celestial master Zhang was even more of a noble existence in the kingdom of Qi. The Taoist temple on Mount Longhu was built with golden walls. There were many green trees planted around the stone platform, which did not change color even in autumn. When the mountain breeze blew, the treetops swayed gently. It was like a fairyland. However, today's Mount Longhu no longer looked like a fairyland. It seemed to have become the legendary underworld. Countless Taoist corpses lay on the stone platform. Broken limbs hung on the treetops. The smell of blood permeated the air. The main door of the Taoist temple was tightly shut. The blood that flowed out from the crack of the door was about to coagulate like glue. In the Taoist temple, the yellow-robed celestial master Zhang looked at the group of black-clothed Taoists in front of him with a pale face. His trembling fingers held the last piece of fu paper. At this moment, all the disciples of the celestial master Taoism had died in battle. He was the only one left alive. The problem was that he did not know why he was still alive. Celestial master Zhang cultivated talismans and had reached the peak of the see-through state. He was only one step away from the knowing destiny state. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace thought that he could break through the realm in 30 years and become a precious divine talisman master. Therefore, he was greatly respected every time he went to the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he did not see any respect in the eyes of these black-clothed Taoists, not even for their enemies. These black-clothed Taoists' eyes were calm and cold. They looked at him as if they were looking at a dead man. You sinners! Didn't the great divine priest destroy your cultivation? How did this happen? Celestial Master Zhang's face was pale and his voice was hoarse with fear. He recognized the faces of several of these black-clothed Taoists. He knew that they were the fallen knights who had been expelled from the West Hill Divine Palace. However, he had heard a few days ago that these fallen knights had been chased like dogs by the army of the South Jin Kingdom and Haotian Taoism. Why did these fallen knights suddenly come to Mount Longhu? Moreover, they had recovered all their strength and were even more powerful. These 16 black-clothed Taoists had all entered the see-through state. 5 of them used to be commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. The powerful aura they exuded proved that they were already at the peak of the see-through state. Commander Zimo, in particular, had even faintly touched that piece of paper and could break through to the knowing destiny state at any time. Other than powerful countries like the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom, which other country in the world could gather so many powerhouses? These black-clothed Taoists possessed such power that the disciples of Mount Longhu could not contend with them. In particular, these black-clothed Taoists had shown a chilling coldness and even bloodlust in the previous battle. That coldness and bloodlust made them even more powerful and terrifying. Celestial Master Zhang was terrified and confused. He did not know what had happened. These sinners who had blasphemed against Haotian not only did not die, but also became so powerful. None of the black-clothed Taoists answered his question. They just stood silently in the middle of the Taoist temple and looked at him as if they were looking at a dead man, as if they were waiting for someone to come. Long Qing appeared in the Taoist temple out of nowhere. He was also wearing a black Taoist robe. The edge of the Taoist robe was embroidered with a golden belt, like a picture painted by the sun beside the dark clouds. Celestial Master Zhang looked at Long Qing and said in disbelief, "You, Prince Long Qing, you are actually not dead." Long Qing said calmly, "If you had experienced my life in the past 2 years, you would probably know that it is also very difficult to want to die." Celestial Master Zhang suddenly understood. He glanced at those black-clothed Taoists and roared hoarsely, "This is all you're doing? You lunatic! Aren't you afraid of being abandoned by Haotian?" Long Qing said, "Perhaps Haotian abandoned you, Celestial Master." Celestial Master Zhang said desperately, "If that is the case, then do it." Long Qing did not say anything, but just looked at him quietly. Celestial Master Zhang suddenly found that Long Qing's eyes had changed. The line between the black pupil and the white of his eyes suddenly blurred, and a very faint gray was emerging. He did not know what was going to happen next, but he guessed that what was going to happen next must be very terrible. He screamed and crushed the last talisman. A wall of fire appeared out of nowhere and quickly closed with his body as the center. He was about to be burned to ashes. Celestial Master Zhang stared at Long Qing through the wall of fire and roared angrily, "You devil! Don't even think about it." Long Qing's expression did not change. The next moment, his figure appeared in the wall of fire. A black peach blossom bloomed behind him. A cold aura was generated in the Taoist temple. The wall of fire suddenly went out. Long Qing's eyes turned completely gray and extremely gloomy. Celestial Master Zhang felt that the psyche power in his body was being sucked out at a high speed. There was extreme fear in his eyes. Looking at Long Qing's still beautiful face, he cursed with resentment and despair. "You will die more miserably than me." With a bang, Celestial Master Zhang's withered body fell to the ground. Long Qing closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, everything had returned to normal. He walked out of the Taoist temple. The 16 black-clothed Taoists, led by ZMO, followed behind him silently. Whether it was their steps or aura, they all secretly followed Long Qing's rhythm and charm. They gradually turned into a whole, and then melted into the night. The heavy door of the Taoist temple slowly opened. The autumn mountain wind gradually blew, fluttering Long Qing's clothes. He felt that he had become a little stronger. It was a good feeling. There will be a high school reunion in the evening. I guess there will be a drink. There will only be one chapter today. However, although tomorrow is Saturday, there will be no rest. At least there will be an update. It's just that I won't write much. Although I am thick-skinned, there is a limit to how thick-skinned I can be. I wish everyone a happy day. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.